operator of any medical distress. The bus operator can contact the MIC via bus radio for any type of emergency and request that help is needed. For further information, please refer to the rider guide at WMATA.com. This concludes our safety contact.
Thank you, Teresa. Good morning again, everyone, and welcome to today's Metro Board activities. This is the meeting of the Board's Executive Committee, so thank you for joining us. First, I'd like to publicly welcome the District of Columbia's new principal member, Valerie Santos. Staff swore her in last month when her appointment was official, so she could begin participating right away. I look forward to publicly swearing Valerie in later at today's board meeting. Welcome, Valerie. Since this is our first public meeting of the day, I'll ask Ms. Ellison, the Board Corporate Secretary, to please call the roll.
Chair Smedberg.
Present.
Vice Chair McAndrew. Vice Chair Lowe. Director Klein.
Present.
Director Letourneau.
Present.
Director Drummer.
Present.
Director Santos. Director Martin Proctor.
Good morning.
Mr. Chair, you have a quorum.
We have today's agenda before us for approval. If there are no objections by members of the Executive Committee, we'll consider the agenda approved as presented. Any objections? Hearing none, the agenda is approved. Now on to the approval of the minutes. We have the sets of minutes of our November 16th meeting and executive session before us for approval. Are there any objections, comments, or corrections to those sets of minutes? Hearing and seeing none, we'll consider the minutes approved as presented. We have one item on the committee agenda this morning, the 2023 update to Metro's Title VI plan. Metro's Title VI plan ensures that we're treating all our customers equitably and that our programs and policies do not discriminate. Metro updates its Title VI plan every 3 years, and our latest update was in 2020. I'll turn the floor over to Jane Bryant, Director of Metro's Office of Equal Employment Opportunity, and Allison Davis, Senior Vice President of Planning and Sustainability, to begin the presentation. Good morning.
Thank you. Vice Chair McAndrews, Vice Chair Lowe, and members of the board, Mr. Clark. As stated, my name is Jan Bryant, and I'm the Director of the Office of Equal Employment Opportunity here at Metro. That office is responsible for ensuring compliance with Title VI and Title VII of the Civil Rights Act. And Ms. Allison Davis is with me. She is the Senior Vice President of Planning and Sustainability. So the purpose, the reason we're before you today is we're seeking board approval of the 2023 Title VI program update and the service monitoring results. By way of background, the Title VI Civil Rights Act of 1964 is federal legislation that prohibits organizations that receive federal financial assistance from discriminating on the basis of race, color, and national origin. And encompassed in national origin is discrimination against people who do not speak English as their primary language. The major objective of Title VI as it relates to transit agencies and transit services is to ensure the level and quality of transportation is provided without regard to race, color, and national origin, to ensure fair and full participation from the customers who are going to be most impacted by transportation decisions, to ensure meaningful access to programs, activities, and information for those who do not speak English as their primary language, and for agencies to address and identify high and adverse impact of decisions on the minority and low-income community. With these objectives for Title VI, the Metro's strategic plan is aligned with the objectives that Title VI has for transit agencies, in that we do include public outreach so that we have fair participation, so the people who are impacted by transportation decisions have input in the decision making. And we do try to target and excuse me, and stress that we are doing outreach to historically marginalized communities and the LEP population. So the Federal Transit Administration, or FTA, is responsible for ensuring that transit agencies comply with Title VI. And one of the methods that they use is to mandate that all transit agencies that receive the federal financial assistance develop the Title VI plan. So FTA provides guidance to us on how and what should be included in the plan. And up here you can see those are the components of the plan. There are some minor components of the plan, which is basically a look back of what happened from the last time we submitted the plan to FTA. So this current plan will include a list of all the Title VI investigations, complaints, and lawsuits that happened. We will have a list of all of the outreaches that have been conducted during that period, and we have a list of all the fair and service equity analysis. The major portion, however, the Title VI plan includes demographic analysis. It includes an update of our public participation plan and an update of the language access plan. For our customer demographics, it's important to understand who rides our system and what the demographics of our customers look like. So based on current demographic information, the 2,000 square mile of the Metro Compact is home to about 4.6 million people, of which 56.3 are minorities and 17.6 are low income. And the surveys that we have up there shows that for Metro Bus, 83% of our riders are people of color, 50% are low income. And on Metro Rail, we have 45% of our customers are people of color and 13% are low income. You will note that we have two low income percentages up there. The first percentage shows the the first bullet up there is the percentage of low income using the definition that is currently in our Title VI plan. Staff is proposing to redefine low income, and so the second bullet shows the percentage of the low income people that would be using our services using the proposed new definition of low income. And Ms. Davis will speak a little bit more about that later on in the presentation. So using these demographics, the public participation plan was updated. It's updated to include all the outreach activities that happened during the past 3 years. With the advent of COVID, it made some of that outreach a little difficult, but the staff was very creative and they still met their requirements to do public outreach to ensure that the public was informed about transportation decisions that may have an impact on their daily lives. During that 3-year period, also, Metro instituted or established the Office of Customer Experience and Engagement to oversee the public activities. This highlights Metro's desire to ensure that the information is getting to the people who are going to be using our system. The public participation plan also documents a process by which we go about getting public participation, and it outlines communication for our limited English proficient customers or LEP customers. So the update talks about the projects that they were involved in to ensure that the communication was put out in a way that was meaningful for the people who needed that information, particularly for the people who are transit dependent and for the people who are limited English proficient. So there's also in the new public participation plan how Metro is going to communicate in the future with these groups. With our language assistance plan, it has been updated using the most current demographics available based on census. And as you can see, we have in the service area about 12% of our population is identified as limited English proficient. Of that population, the most frequently spoken language is Spanish. It's almost 60% of our LEP population, followed by Chinese, which is about 5.2%, and then followed by French, which is 4.3%. If you look at the map, most of our LEP population on the right-hand side is in the Prince George's County area, and then further down on the left-hand side in Fairfax County. If you're going to segregate this by mode, Prince George's County has on rail, about 17% of the population rides rail that are LEP, And for bus, Fairfax County has about 18% of their LEP population that rides bus. When we updated the LEP, we looked at how often people contacted the agency for translation purposes, or they did hits that we look at, and we do an analysis as to what are the top languages spoken most frequently. 3 years ago, we had about 9 top languages. This year, we have 13. So the new languages include Russian, Portuguese, Farsi, and Tagalog. I say that wrong. I'm sorry, but anyway, Tagalog. That's it. Sorry. So this is important because these are the languages that our communication should be using when we're addressing service changes, fare changes, or where we're doing projects in a community that has a high population of the people that are LEP. So one of the things, because Metro has advisory boards, the FTA requires that we look at the minority representation on the advisory boards. Metro has the Riders Advisory Council and the Accessibility Advisory Committee. From the past 3 years, the representation of minorities has decreased slightly on both of these committees. And that's not really surprising given the small number of members of the committee. So if you lose one member, it's going to be a much higher percentage decrease than normal. Staff is aware of this, and they are starting efforts to increase recruitment, to increase the minority representation of these committees. So these are the mandatory elements that are required to put in the Title VI plan. It is what is in our 2023 Title VI program update. It also will have information about the definitions that staff is proposing to be changed and some other changes that staff is proposing. So at this time, I will turn the presentation over to Ms. Davis so she can discuss the changes that staff is proposing.
All right, good morning, and thank you, Jan. Good morning, Chair Smedberg and members of the committee. So I'm going to talk through 2 things. One, the retrospective, right? We look back at service equity and how we've provided service over the past couple of years during that period of the last program, and then talk through some of those proposed changes that we want to take into account for going forward. But first, I wanted to put Title VI in context with our larger equity mission. We know that persons of color, persons of low income and or disability, they disproportionately experience injustices across many facets of their lives, and due to a lot of those longstanding structural challenges that many of us know and work in. And so while Title VI really helps ensure that we aren't providing service that is discriminatory, it kind of sets that minimum. It's the minimum that the federal government requires us to look into. And we know that our operations, our service choices, all of our decisions really change lives. And so we've set equity as a core value in terms of our mission and our mission going forward. So with all of that in mind, we are doing a lot more, and it's really to say that Title VI is that the minimum that we need to do, and through things like designing a better bus network that really looks at equity-focused communities and connecting them to where they need to go when they need to travel, to setting up the Metro Lift, the low-income fare product, to hiring a chief diversity, equity, and inclusion officer, to setting up a transit equity working group. Those are all the things that Metro is doing that is much more than Title VI to really drive forward equity into this region and create the region that we all want to live in. So with that, wanted to highlight what the process is that we look at for all of our Title VI analysis. So it's really, we're looking to understand the disparate impacts for persons of color or customers of color, and then any disproportionate burdens for low-income customers. And so we really first established that baseline. Those are the survey that Ms. Bryan talked about, but it's looking at mode specific. and understanding the demographics of who is actually riding our system. And then we are looking at, for any of the proposals, right, what we're going to see for the budget, for any of the service or fare changes, understanding who is impacted, and then understanding that, putting the demographics up against that level of who is impacted. So we're better able to understand impacted riders from those protected populations. And then finally, we compare who is actually impacted from the demographics to that mode average. And so looking to see that comparison is not outside the threshold that the board has set. And so making sure that we don't have any disparate treatments for the things that we're proposing. So with that in mind, we're looking back. This is that retrospective. So as part of the Title VI program, we're required to look at 4 different service metrics. So on-time performance, passenger load, so that's crowding, scheduled headways, and service availability. And then we also look at passenger amenities. So that's bus bay, that's shelters at bus bays, passenger information, escalators, elevators, that sort of thing. And then also fleet assignment, which is the age of our vehicles. And so looking back, in the past 3-year program, we did not have any disparate impacts from or disproportionate burdens for our protected populations. I do want to call out that NA in Metrobus, and this kind of gets back to what we're doing to really drive forward on equity, but most of our bus stops we do not own, right? They are under local control by the jurisdictions who own and operate the roads. But we are working. We recognize that as many people see that as our property, and that's their first interaction with taking the bus. So they are. We're working with setting guidelines, bus stop guidelines, really pushing forward on getting seating, passenger information, what we can do with our jurisdictional partners to really push the envelope there. So what we're proposing to do going forward, so this impacts once, assuming the program is adopted, these program updates would go forward from there. So first and foremost, as part of the Better Bus Network redesign, we are proposing using the census, not the rider survey, to understand impacts for low income and persons of color. The reason we're doing that is if we're proposing service on a new corridor in a new area, we won't have survey data to be able to understand the impacts. So census is kind of the next best thing. Another proposed changes is about how we talk about what a major service change is for rail. Right now, adding or subtracting 1 train is a major service change, and that would require a full Title VI process, which that is a time and labor intensive effort. And so this provides us the ability to have some room, about 20% one way or the other, on number of trains that we can add or subtract without having to go through that entire Title VI process. And then finally, as Jan alluded to, it is really updating the threshold for low income. Right now, the low income threshold is $30,000. It is not indexed to inflation, so that has been set since 2013 and has not changed. It also does not tie to household size. So what we are proposing to do, and this is putting it much more into context with what our local jurisdictional partners do, as well as what how MetroLift defines low income, but putting it at 200% of the federal poverty level, which then, again, is indexed, changes year over year, and does tie to inflation. Happy to answer any further questions on that when we get to it. So as part of the Title VI process, we had to go out and really try to engage our customers and make sure that they are comfortable with what we're proposing. We did this back in October. And so that was, we had a survey and webpage in English and Spanish. We partnered with the Transit app because we found that is a great way to really reach a lot of our customers. We were out on social media, and the way to really ensure that we're hearing from customers who this could impact was we did a big push to community-based organizations and jurisdictional email outreach. So we tried to hit about a couple of thousand people that way to really make sure that people are hearing about this information and are able to chime in on their perspectives. So with that, We heard our survey results. It was a fairly straightforward survey, but the 4 slices of this, generally about 75 to 80% of the people were in favor of these changes. And it varied anywhere from 73 to 81, but that's really, showing that most people were in favor of what we were proposing. And so with that, thank you for your time. Happy to answer any questions, and we request board approval of the 2023 Title VI program update and service monitoring results.
Thank you so much. Any questions from a committee member?
This is good.
Thank you, Dr. Lowe. Ms. Klein.
Yeah, just one question. I believe FTA is in the Federal Transit Administration is in the process of updating. Is that my mic? Yeah. Okay. Updating the Title VI regulations, or recently has. Can you remind me where we are in that process and how this aligns?
So there was information put out that they were thinking about revising the circular that outlines the components of the Title VI program plan that they require to be submitted. I have not heard where they are with that process. Hopefully we'll hear something soon.
But this is consistent with the current circular.
That's correct. Yes, it is.
All right, thank you.
Yes, Ms. Martin Proctor. Yeah.
Hi, thank you so much for this report. It's truly appreciated. I have a more detailed question. You may not have the answer to this, but I wanted to know, do we have a breakdown with regards to outreach and then response, specifically within the disability and accessibility community?
I don't have down to the disability community off the top of, we can get back to you on that.
Thank you.
Allison, I do have one question, and that is about the new definition of low income, and I know we've talked about this. So how are you using all 3 states as a comparison, or our compact region as a average? How are you doing it, or have you selected a certain jurisdiction to use as your base from which to work from?
So I thought my understanding is it sets for the area, right? So for this area, we've got that 200%. And then from that, obviously it changes year over year. So we're tying it back to the survey cutoffs. But yes, it is set for the area.
Okay, great.
And it's for the MSA, not the WMATA service area.
Oh,
but it's
okay, yeah.
The WMATA service area is
Yeah,
like
it's
a
pretty
Russian
close.
nesting
Yeah,
doll
yeah.
inside the MSA, and it's an official census estimate.
Okay. Any other questions? Okay, I want to, with no further discussion, I'll go ahead and move approval. Is there a second from a committee member? Seconded by Mr. McAndrew. Any further comments or questions? Hearing none, all those in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay. Thank you. With no further business to come before the committee, we will stand adjourned for a brief moment. And next we'll turn to the Finance and Capital Committee, Mr. Letourneau.
Thank you, Chair Smedberg, and good morning, everybody. Welcome to December 14th Finance and Capital Committee meeting. We have first on the agenda is approval of the agenda. If there are no objections, we'll consider the agenda approved as presented. Are there any objections by members of the committee to the agenda? Hearing none, the agenda is approved as presented. Now to the approval of minutes. We have the minutes of our November 16th meeting before us for approval. Are there any objections to the minutes as presented? Hearing none, we'll consider the minutes approved as presented. We have 2 items on this morning's agenda. The first one is to accept 2 public hearing staff reports and approve changes to transit facilities at 2 stations in the District of Columbia, Deanwood and Congress Heights. Approval of these changes will allow for joint development projects at 2 stations, bringing residents and neighborhood services closer to our transit services. Joint developments like these are also a key component of Metro's strategic transformation plan and will help Metro grow ridership at these stations. The next item on the agenda is the presentation of the General Manager's proposed fiscal year 25 budget. I'm going to save my comments until we move to that. So let's go ahead and move to our action item, which is the acceptance of the public hearing staff reports and approval of mass transit plan amendments for Deanwood and Congress Heights. And with us is Liz Price, our Vice President of Real Estate and Parking, and Stephen Sigerlin, Director of Real Estate Development. Morning.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. Thank you for having us today. Today, I'll be addressing two compact hearings that were held in the District of Columbia about proposed changes that will enable joint development and increase ridership at Deanwood and support redevelopment of the historic St. Elizabeth's East Campus and increase ridership at Congress Heights. This item is also requesting approval of amendments to the mass transit plan as required by the compact to execute these changes. These actions play a role in Metro's strategic transformation plan goals focused on regional opportunity and partnership, as well as sustainability, in that they will help to accelerate transit-oriented development around our stations and support the growth of the region and access to transit, while also growing fare and non-fare revenues to Metro and new tax revenues for our jurisdictional partners that support Metro. For background, staff have been coordinating with the district on these projects and plans since 2015, leading to board approvals in April 2023 to hold compact hearings for Deanwood and Congress Heights. The public hearing events were held between July and September of 2023, and the staff reports were published for a 10-day public comment period this past month of November 2023, leading to this board request today. Regarding the public hearing event, they were held using a hybrid in-person and virtual format. Prior to each event, staff organized marketing and media campaigns to notify customers in the station's neighborhoods about the proposed changes and hearing dates using print and online sources, in addition to creating a web page, sending emails to community groups, posting signs, and in-person outreach at stations. Customers participating virtually could join using a Zoom link or by telephone, and there was also a live YouTube broadcast. Comments or public testimony could be provided during the hearing, but also using an online survey form. This feedback was summarized in the staff reports published along with responses to concerns and presented online. And in the following slides, I'll give a brief highlight of each project and the staff report content. At Deanwood, the proposed changes will enable joint development on Metro's property and increase ridership. It involves the removal of the 160-space park and ride lot and the redirection of approximately 20 daily customers to alternative Metro parking facilities at the adjacent Cheverly and Minnesota Ave stations, which have excess capacity. The project does not include any changes to the bus or the kiss and ride facilities. The public hearing was held on July 11, 2023, and the ultimate joint development at Deanwood will include two components: a new public library funded and constructed by the District of Columbia, tentatively between 2026 and 2028, as well as a housing and retail project funded and constructed by a future joint developer that Metro will select through a solicitation process in the coming year. Out of the 148 comments received, 73 of the comments supported the project or did not express an objection, whilst 27% opposed. The most significant concerns expressed were about the removal of the park and ride facility and impacts on access. However, given the low level of utilization of the facility, approximately 20 daily customers, and availability of two other Metro parking facilities within 5 minutes, staff feel the changes provide reasonable accommodations. There are also concerns about safety at the proposed alternative park and ride facilities, but staff found few records of historic incidents, but will continue to coordinate with Metro's transit police to evaluate the concerns and identify actions. As a result, staff recommends the board approve the proposed changes as originally envisioned. At Congress Heights, the proposed changes support redevelopment of the historic St. Elizabeth's East Campus, largely owned by the district, and increase Metro's ridership. The project will involve the relocation of the bus loop and the Kiss and Ride facilities to enable the extension of 13th Street Southeast to Alabama Ave Southeast, improving access and circulation to the campus, but also creating space for the new public library proposed by the district. The changes will also include the reduction of the Kiss and Ride capacity from 54 to 8 spaces, and the addition of a new traffic signal at the bus loop exit onto Alabama Ave to improve safety for bus operations, but also for pedestrians and bicyclists accessing the station. The public hearing was held on September 25th, 2023, and the project will be funded and constructed by the District of Columbia, tentatively beginning in summer of 2024. Out of the 61 comments received, 69 of the comments supported the project or did not express an objection, while 31% opposed. The most significant concerns expressed were about the reduction of spaces in the Kiss and Ride facility and the impacts on access. However, given the low utilization of the facility, totaling less than 10 to 25 customers daily, mostly which are parking for durations of 4 hours or longer, and the availability of 2 other Metro parking facilities within 5 minutes at Southern Ave and Anacostia, staff feel the changes provide reasonable accommodations for parking access. There were also concerns about the pedestrian and bicycle safety of the site's current condition, which the project will improve by adding new or expanded bicycle pathways to the station, signalizing crosswalks, and adding new lighting. As a result, staff recommends the board approve the proposed changes here as well as originally envisioned. With that summary of the 2 projects, I'll return to the board action and staff recommendation, which is for approval of the compact hearing staff reports for Deanwood and Congress Heights and the associated amendments to the mass transit plan. This concludes our presentation, Mr. Chairman, and I'll hold for any questions that you may have.
Thank you. Questions from, I guess, first members of the committee, and then the whole board. Talk about.
Could you go back one slide to slide 29? So for both, first off, thank you. These improvements at Deanwood and Congress Heights in terms of opening the spigot on joint development are long desired, I think, by these communities. And I am really thrilled to see us moving forward with a sense of urgency around getting something done at these stations. My one concern here is that in terms of the feedback we got at Congress Heights, while a plurality of the feedback that we got is in support of the project, my concern is really the 31% that didn't know what to think about it, right? that are confused about what the project is. Can you tell me a little bit more about how did the hearing go and what kind of outreach have we been doing? A lot of this is buried in the appendix of the staff report, but could we surface to our public meeting here today a little bit about what we've done to educate the neighborhood and to bring in DCPL to share their vision and what are we offering here in this JD?
Absolutely. At Congress Heights, because the sort of mix of partners on the district side, DC Public Library, and also the Office for Economic Development and Planning with their project on the campus. There's a number of initiatives going on, and each of these funding sources and projects have their own public participation plans that are really kickstarting right now. So one of the major parts,
Okay, here we go.
one of the
Yeah.
major parts at our compact hearing was discussing the connection to their planning efforts that are really ramping up. The St. Elizabeth's East Campus, of course, has had a very long planning process spanning probably decades at this point. And I think one of the challenges in this process is they're so episodic that it takes that constant reminder and updating at every meeting of those connections. So that's something that we did during that meeting. We reinforced in each of the sections where we responded to comments in the staff report, pointing to the sources and the district where they could find more information or stay tuned to their public participation plans. But I think it's something that we will continue to do with our communications about the project as it advances.
Okay, and I mean, the library has their own work to do, and it's just like, of course, timelines don't always align. And I think the important thing with this 31% here is to understand this is a clear message that there's more comms to do on this, and there's already a plan. So that's fantastic. I just want to thank you guys for the great job that you've done keeping all of the stakeholders that I hear from about these projects in the loop, the Deanwood Citizens Association and the relevant council members. There are people who have a lot of high hopes for these projects, and their hopes are precious. And I appreciate all of the work that you're doing to deliver for the people who care about these communities and want to see something special at these stations. I was just at Congress Heights, and I walked through this parking lot in order to get to, because I was really cutting through to go to Sycamore and Oak, and I think that this project in particular it's not gonna be cutting through a parking lot next time, and that's exciting. So I'm thrilled. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Any other discussion on this item? Then with no further discussion, I will move approval. Is there a second? Member of the committee? Thank you. Second by Ms. Klein. I'll ask Ms. Ellison to call the roll.
Chair Letourneau?
Aye.
Vice Chair Klein?
Aye.
Mr. McAndrew?
Aye.
Mr. Chair, the motion passes.
Thank you very much. Thank you both. Mr. Segelin, before you leave, I understand that this is your last time with us.
It is.
Yeah, I'm sorry to hear that. I'm excited for you, and I'd like to turn it over to the general manager for.
Yeah, well, thank you, Chair. And I just wanted to, publicly acknowledge Stephen and all his hard work. He's leaving us to another, we'll say, transportation provider. So he's and a good one too. So and he's not going to the dark side. So so we appreciate very much just what all Stephen has done every day. And I think to Board Member Lowe's points, he really cares about our community. He's a member of our community. He works hard on these things. He's been involved in this space for a long time in different types of roles. We just, on behalf of the whole staff and the organization, Stephen, thank you, and look forward to seeing you out in the episode.
Thank you.
And thank you, Scott.
Luckily, it's not too far away, just across the mall.
Thank you both. Okay, the next item on the agenda, as I mentioned, is the presentation of the general manager's proposed fiscal year 25 operating and capital budgets. We've had ongoing budget discussions for the past several months. Today's presentation gives us a better idea of the specific actions Metro would need to take to balance this budget absent any additional subsidy. I do want to be clear on this point. Metro, our board, the general manager, has an obligation to present a balanced budget. It is not an option. At the end of the day, our budget has to be balanced. And since we are so reliant on subsidy, our budget is a reflection of what we get from others. And so what you see before us today, I'm sure, I know, is not what the general manager wants to propose. It's not what the board wants to propose, but it is fulfilling our fiduciary obligations to this organization. It is certainly my hope that it is not where we will end up. We're working closely with our jurisdictional partners to identify and obtain additional funding that would allow us to minimize all of the different things that are in this proposal. But as of right now, we can't assume that we get those. And then we have certain timelines and process requirements that require us to start this process now, with an understanding, that it could change, but if it doesn't, this is what we're looking at. Now, this is the general manager's recommendation. It is not necessarily the board's, even in the same circumstances. That's why we have this process, and we'll have the opportunity to work on it. The timeline for the budget process moving forward. So today is our first public look at the proposed budget, and then next month in January, the board will have another discussion. We may, at that time, make modifications to what the general manager has proposed, and then we will authorize the public input process. As a reminder to folks, if we want something to be considered as part of a potential change in the budget process, it has to be part of that packet that goes out for public input. It does not lock us into any of those specific things, but it gives us options. And so I would advocate for being more expansive rather than less with that public docket process, so that we have optionality as we get into later parts of the process. In February, we'll open the public comment period. We'll have several in-person. We'll also have some virtual public hearings. Usually that process takes a couple weeks, and that'll get us into March. After the public input closes, staff will compile what we heard, develop a recommended budget for the board to approve. Right now, in our typical process, we approve a budget in April. We may have some flexibility there, and we'll work closely with staff on that to allow for additional time. We're going to be watching the legislative sessions that are occurring at a parallel track, especially in Virginia and Maryland in that time period, because their sessions are, roughly January, March into April, and see where they end up. And that may require us, or we may choose to move our final budget adoption back a little bit. I am very cognizant as a local government elected official that it is very challenging for our subsidy partners, especially in local governments, because they have their own budget processes. They have to adopt their own budgets, generally starting in the April timeframe. And so they need guidance from us as to what numbers to put in those budgets. We're going to have a lot of conversation. I know the general manager is in regular contact with the county administrators, county executives from all the jurisdictions, and that dialogue will have to continue as we kind of get through this process to help give them as much guidance as we can. But I will say, kind of now, I said this to the Virginia staff yesterday, that they're probably going to be more frustrated with us than they've been in the past. However, it's just an unavoidable consequence of the situation that we're in. So I would encourage everybody on the board and the public to take time now to review the proposal. We're going to hear from staff in a moment. Think about changes that we might want to see as our board takes this up, and then we'll deal with this in January. The public will have their opportunity as well. So I will turn it over to our financial team. Or actually Randy first.
Start off with a few comments if I can, Mr. Chair. But thank you for the setup on that. Obviously, I don't want to say we're in the first inning, because I think we've been in the first inning for about 6 months now. But I think you're right. We have more process to go through here. As we've kind of been talking, we've been really working on this budget for probably a good 6 months. And we've been doing this, I think, very transparently, both at the board, committee meetings, working with our partners. So, you mentioned that this is definitely not the budget I wish I was proposing to the board, to our staff, to our customers. But I am very proud of the work and the process that we have done, despite the challenges, despite the severe consequences. I've said pretty publicly that the budget is numbers, and numbers aren't emotional, but the outcomes of what we do are very, very emotional, because they very much impact people's lives. So we don't make this proposal lightly. We don't think a customer or a staff member out there, this means a lot to them, and I, kind of want them to know that this is not just done as an exercise. We are trying to run this organization as efficiently as possible to deliver the best service for the region. I want to thank the collaboration. We got a lot of members from our JCC here, county executives, CAO, COG, our jurisdictional partners have been just fantastic. We've been doing an enormous amount of work, quite frankly. They're like part-time WMATA staff at this point, how much time they're spending on this topic. And just, publicly want to acknowledge how much work they do and how much they're all working together. And the board, you've all done an enormous amount of work on this already. And I appreciate your guidance and kind of leadership throughout this process. And I look forward to, hopefully getting a recommended budget that doesn't look like we're at here today. But as you said, this is our fiduciary responsibility today. So we'll go through these slides. I'm going to do a little setup here and then hand it off to you, Cindy and Tom. So what I think is really important is we have to still ground this organization in what we are trying to be versus just go into the numbers of where we are with the unfortunate conditions of today. So I'm going to kind of talk about what the region needs to thrive and grow, and then I'm going to hand it off to you, Cindy and Tom. So we'll go to the next slide. So what's really important here is things are going well here at Metro. And I mention this all the time. I'm really proud of the team effort, and I'm thankful for our customers here. We've done an enormous amount to put ourselves, I think, in a better position to have this complex budget conversation. Service is doing really well. Perfect, of course not, but doing really well. And we restored our service. Our public safety crime is down every month since February. Ridership is up 30% since Q1 of FY24. I think we're leading the country for a large agency on ridership recovery. We've completed an enormous amount of our capital program, the largest capital program in the history of the organization. Many projects on schedule or ahead of schedule and on budget, including like the Yellow Line as an example. The fair equity aspects of our LIFT program, and really kind of to be that community partner that I think for a long time people wanted Metro to jump into that space a little deeper. And we're modernizing with our zero emission technology and so many other things at the organization. So you put all that together, we have our highest customer satisfaction rating we've ever had. And I just remind everyone publicly about we are in a good position. And unfortunately, this budget will take away all that work we've done to get back to running a really good system that this region can rely on, which drives our economy, our equity topics, and our sustainability topics. So as you go to the next slide, what we really worked here with the board, when I had this opportunity to have this role was, what are we trying to make Metro, right? Metro is more than tunnels and buses and trains and stations and all of, access vehicles. It's a larger community asset. And when this organization was founded, President Johnson at the time, before some of us were actually born, put this idea that the metro system here in DC should be the national example of what a transit. And they searched all over the world to say what are the best practices and how to do this right here. And in many ways, many of my peers around the country are very jealous of the quality of infrastructure we have because it was built in a certain way. With that comes actual cost, though, right? And so the question is, do we take this national model and be proud of that and have all that investment really show what America can be? And we want to take that to the next level. So the next slide shows, and when we put the strategic transformation plan together, what do we want to move Metro towards? And we want to have more things like rapid bus networks than just, than we have today. We want to get into platform screen doors and automated trains to the highest level of Europe and Asia. There's no reason that the richest country in the history of time can't actually be as good as many of our other countries around the world that have much lower standard of living than we have. How do we get that weekend and weekday service frequency that serves everyone in this region? How do we get to a much higher environmental impact to our region? And how do we work with our peers, colleagues around the region to make a seamless network? And if you went to a place like Paris, as an example, the regional rail, the subways, the buses, they all work together in a seamless way. And we have an enormous amount of opportunity in our region to connect all of the different operators, modes, and means together, because our goal as a region should be to get more people on transit, period, because we know how much transit helps in so many ways. So the next slide really sets up, we all got together. We did an incredibly transparent process, very collaborative. We met with, people like the mayor and the council, to county executives and state leaders, congressional staff, all of our partners to say, what is a strategic transformation plan look like? What is the marker that we want to be, and therefore what's that, because that should drive all of our budgeting investment plan. So we put this together, and I'm really thankful that the board adopted that plan. So as we go through a couple more slides here, we'll go two more, John, if you're moving those, or Jose, to service excellence. And the idea is these are the categories of things we said that we want to do as an organization, not things that we aspire to do, that we should do. And those things are things like we should be back to staying open later on Friday and Saturday evening. We should be opening earlier on the weekend. We need more bus lanes, and we need them now, not years from now, now. We need to have get our fleet in order, our 8000 series trains, so we have a great fleet long term. We need to work on our signaling system because that is going to cause us long-term problems. We have to have an equitable, affordable metro access system for our most vulnerable in our community. We have to drive our frequency network. This organization, with a lot of leadership of this board and people around this region, have said, we need a better bus network. And we've spent years working on it, and now we have it done, and we are not able to move it forward because we don't have the actual financial predictability and certainty to move an enormous positive thing for this region forward that in many ways will save us money and in other ways connect a lot more people to opportunity. We just don't have that certainty right now on how to move that forward. We really need to be thinking more holistically about fares as well and driving into fare capping and other things. So all the things that we've been talking about. On talented teams, we all talked that we can't do anything with great people without the great people that work here. And we have a workforce that is aging quickly. This is a national issue. We need that next generation of transit professionals. We need to be a place people want to come and work, and they're dedicating careers. Without the good people that work here, we can't deliver what the community needs. We need to be thinking about our transit police department and invest in our public safety resources, which is a kind of a crisis of hiring police around the country. Performance. We have to drive our entire model on performance, not showing up and doing a good job and rewarding staff for doing that. And I really want us to work with our partners on regional training opportunities and workforce development. There's so much we could do across the three-state area to do that. On the partnership front, we just had this great example of development at Deanwood and Congress Heights. We need to do more of that, and I want to make it crystal clear with the board support. All of our partners out there, we are ready to do activity with you. So if we're not doing it well, we're going to double down on that, but we need to continue to drive transit-oriented community here in the DMV. We have to figure this blue, orange, silver study piece out. This thing's been kicked down the road for multiple years. Now got a lot of work done, a lot of survey, a lot of public input, and now we're stopped again because we don't know what to do financially going forward. At some point, this organization has to put a marker down so we can be competitive for federal grants, because all of our peers around the country are getting billions of dollars to do investments of transit, and we are on the sidelines because we don't know what to do long term. And I think all of us know we have to move that forward. Back to regional integration, we have regional rail integration happening between Maryland and Virginia, which is great, but not necessarily tied enough, I think, to Metro. And how do we do that holistically? We need to work on our bus fleets and standards. We have about 10 operators around the region, and we have lots of opportunity to work on that. Bike share is another good example, regional ferry. How do we as a region really start thinking about strategic mobility, then annual budget cycles to annual budget cycles? And then how do we actually think about integrated payment systems as well, whether it's tolling, parking, transit, all into one mobility pass. Again, world best examples. This is stuff that a lot of people are doing around the world that we just can adopt and get with. On the sustainability front, as we always talk, that's a combination of environmental and financial. And I appreciate Chair Letourneau has mentioned this numerous times. This idea, we don't have a reserve policy and a rainy day account. That is not healthy for an organization as critically important as we are. We've talked that it might be beneficial for this organization in multi-year budgeting and forecasts. Again, helps us for predictability, but really helps our jurisdictional partners on predictability as well. We shouldn't be using, obviously, our capital money to fund operations. I think we all know that. If we have to do it for a year or two as a bridge, sometimes you got to do things you don't perfectly want. But that cycle is not something that I think we want to get back to. And we got to keep working on our environmental program, including zero emission, because we are more or less that key linchpin to meet everyone else's environmental policy goals around the region. So kind of as I wrap up here, we need a healthy metro system if we're going to have a great DMV. We have an amazing place. COG suggests we're going to grow by 1.5 million people by 2050. Enormous amount of people. We're urbanizing quickly as a country. Lots of our region is doing housing and land use policy to drive more people into density around transit. Traffic is at a standstill in most places. Roads are not going to be built in this region to solve any of our mobility problems. We need to figure out what we are going to do long term as a transit network and move more people, period. So I'm really excited of the work that this team has accomplished. And again, thank the board for all your support and leadership on that. But I think we are at a kind of existential moment here for Metro between what we all say as a region we want to be, not Randy Clark and some staff and the board. The region said this strategic transformation plan is what we should do. So we are at a point, are we going to invest in that? And again, whether it's a bridge for a year or two to actually fully get into that, or are we going to go the opposite direction? Because the opposite direction will take us an enormous amount of time to even get back to today's level. So lots of things that the board knows. This is a chance publicly to kind of really, I'm sure there's a lot of different people watching today that don't watch normally. We just want the public at large to know, again, this is not a budget all of us would like to do. It's a fiduciary responsibility piece. Again, appreciate our partners and jurisdictional staff all working together. I remain cautiously optimistic that we'll be able to move forward, but we are at a point that we have to make a serious decision on how to move this organization forward. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to both Yutundi and Tom. And I just, I think it's really important to acknowledge Yutundi, Tom, and their teams have been working just nonstop on this. And so I appreciate all their efforts. And I know you've seen pieces of this over the last few months, but hopefully they'll be able to give you a really good deep dive here. And then we really look forward to hearing any thoughts and questions you have. Even if we don't have any answers or conversation today, we'll take those back and really come up with deep answers so we can have a even more robust conversation in January. So Yutundi and Tom, thank you.
Thank you, Randy. And good morning, Mr. Chairman and members of the board. My name is Yetunde Olumide, Chief Financial Officer and Executive Vice President. I'll now go through some context and talk through the constraints that inform the development of the FY25 proposed budget. Metro's operating costs have risen with inflation, and many of its funding sources are not indexed to account for inflation, but are instead fixed contributions, which has eroded the value of Metro's operating and capital funding over the years. The left side of this slide shows Metro's approved operating subsidy, which it uses to help fund day-to-day service. As you can see, the operating subsidy has not kept up with either the 3% growth allowed by law or with inflation. If the operating subsidy had been adjusted for increases in CPIW, it would be worth about $302 million, or 23% more than the FY25 current level. Metro's capital funding, which it uses to pay for vehicles, facilities, and longer-term improvements, has lost ground even faster because two of its key sources are fixed and do not have annual adjustments. The Passenger Rail Investment and Improvement Act, PRIA, began providing $300 million, including jurisdictional match, to Metro beginning in 2010. Based on CPIW, PRIA buys 29% less today than it did when originally authorized. Similarly, since DC, Maryland, and Virginia came together to pass a historic dedicated capital funding for Metro in 2018 at $500 million per year, due to inflation, the purchasing power has declined by 18% based on changes in CPIW. This erosion of funding constraints Metro's ability to plan for the future the region deserves. If Metro had not provided the jurisdictional credit in 2020 and the jurisdictional subsidy had been adjusted for CPIW since FY20, Metro would have a balanced operating budget until FY27 without service cuts or fare increases. Further, the majority of the subsidy increase after 2025 would be for the post-pandemic fare revenue replacement. A similar situation exists on the capital funding side, and there would be no capital debt ceiling until after 2036. Indexing Metro's operating and capital funding to inflation could provide the necessary predictability for long-term sustainability. Instead, Metro faces a long-term structural deficit, as we showed you back in June, that begins at $750 million and continues to grow in the out years. Metro's funding structure from inception lacked dedicated operating funding and was inadequate. However, this problem was accelerated by the COVID-19 pandemic, which destabilized ridership and passenger revenue trends. While federal relief funding played a critical role in bridging Metro's funding gap and ensuring continued delivery of essential transit service as the region recovered, Metro will exhaust its remaining federal relief funding early in FY25. This will also have a significant impact beyond FY25 as the structural deficit continues to grow. Under the current subsidy model, Metro faces a structural funding shortfall, yielding a fiscal deficit of $750 million in FY25, which will grow to reaching an annual deficit of approximately $1.2 billion by FY35. This slide shows drivers Metro's $750 million deficit, which can be broken down into three categories. 26% from jurisdictional subsidy credits at the start of the pandemic, 38% from decreased revenues from ridership, fares, parking, and advertising since the pandemic, and 36% from inflation and Metro's contractual commitments. As you recall in previous updates we provided, like other transit agencies, inflation has been a large contributor to Metro's deficits. It has impacted expenses at every level, including labor and fuel. Of particular concern is that Metro's collective bargaining agreements that govern compensation for the majority of Metro's employees are indexed to inflation, while the jurisdictional operating subsidy is not. While we do face a large structural deficit, I want to ground everyone in the facts about Metro's expense trends. Metro has responsibly managed expense growth within its control, and the trend since 2019 shows that. Since 2019, Metro's operating budget growth has averaged about 4.8%, which is well below the regional peer average of about 7%. Despite the addition of major system expansions for Silver Line Phase 2 and Potomac Yard. Metro is also well within the national trend for operating expense growth during the same period. Metro's budgeted annual operating expense growth of 4.8% aligns with the 5-year average growth of the CPIW of about 4.4%. During these 5 years, Metro opened the Silver Line and Potomac Yard Station, as well as entered into new CBA contracts in 2021. Without the system expansion projects, Metro's 5-year growth in operating expenses would be about 3.7% on average, below CPIW for that same time period. Metro's responsible management and oversight of expenses and operating efficiency is also seen in the relationship between our headcount and the amount of service we're providing, which is measured in revenue miles. In FY24, Metro has 11,215 authorized operating full-time equivalents in the operating budget compared to 11,674 in 2016. a decrease in headcount of about 4%. At the same time, Metro's annual revenue miles grew by 25% since 2016. In summary, this means Metro not only has fewer total operating FTEs, but for each mile of service Metro operates today, it has 22% fewer FTEs per mile of service. Having discussed this year's context and constraints, we'll discuss the strategy applied to the FY25 proposed operating budget. Budgets are a mix of internal and external factors. Given funding uncertainty, which is ultimately an external factor, the proposed budget uses every internal lever it can to get a required balanced budget. Metro continues to engage in robust financial management oversight this year to maximize potential one-time carryover savings that can be applied to FY25. Metro is also working to identify future savings that will be reoccurring. After these efficiencies are exhausted, we looked at fares, service levels, and the use of preventive maintenance transfers to fully balance the budget. External levers, those outside of Metro's control, include an increase in jurisdictional subsidies, additional federal relief funding, ridership patterns, and federal revenue recovery related to SMART benefits. Since FY18, management actions have included expense reductions and revenue-generating initiatives, resulting in savings of about $358 million. These savings build on Metro's focus on efficiency, streamlining, and innovation, and will help bring the deficit down in FY25. Robust fiscal management and oversight has enabled Metro to identify about $95 million in one-time savings, above what was originally forecasted when the FY24 budget was approved through improved contract service management, office consolidation efficiencies, and personnel expense management. We also formed an internal cost mitigation task force with the goal of identifying an additional $50 million across the authority in ongoing expense reductions and savings for FY25 and beyond. These savings will not impact safety and service levels, and we've identified 4 main categories: administrative efficiencies for about $30 million, reduced consulting services, digital transformation, and improved asset management for about $7 million. Additionally, the FY25 proposed budget would freeze wages for all non-represented employees and for 2 collective bargaining units, which would generate an additional $38 million. Another factor impacting the FY25 budget is inflation. Although historic levels of inflation measured by CPIW continue to impact costs and impose uncertainty, Metro is actively monitoring changes to inflation. The FY25 proposed budget includes a 3.5% inflation rate. Collectively, Metro is using all of its internal levers to close the $750 million deficit. One-time carryover savings, cost savings, task force savings, and salary and wage freezes would generate about $183 million in deficit reduction. In addition, lowering the original CPI assumption of 5% to 3.5% for non-personnel expenses saves an additional $8 million, which is offset by a $67 million revenue adjustment for continued prevalence of shorter distance and flat fare trips based on FY24 year-to-date average fares, or a $59 million increase in the deficit. The preventive maintenance transfer of operating expenses to the capital budget could be increased by about $193 million above the base of 60 for a total of $253 million in FY25. After all these significant actions are taken, the FY25 proposed budget has a remaining deficit of about $433 million, which can only be closed through service cuts, administrative cuts, and fare increases. Tom will now discuss these.
Thank you, Yetunde and Randy, and good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. My name is Tom Webster, our Chief Planning and Performance Officer here at Metro. As we've discussed in some detail, our region has made a massive investment in high capacity, high frequency, and high quality integrated rail, bus, and paratransit system and network. This system moves people, connects our region, supports our economic prosperity and our region's equity and environmental goals. With this investment comes a financial structure with high fixed costs, a lot of infrastructure, maintenance, support, and quality costs that don't vary significantly with the levels of service, of transit service provided to customers. So to close a funding gap of this size, over $430 million, without additional investment, the service cuts must be significant and cut into those fixed costs. The result is a reduced, much less useful transit network and severe service cuts for our customers. None of the concepts we'll be discussing this morning are new. The proposed budget includes more details on about the cuts and fare increases that will be needed without additional investment. Overall, this is bad. There aren't good choices here. There's no painless way to cut service, and at this magnitude, it's very bad for our customers in our region. We are approaching this in an effort to preserve service where we have the most customers, the most ridership. The proposal includes eliminating service entirely on 67 of our 135 bus lines, reducing service on 41 of those lines that remain. On rail, major service frequency reduction, so how often the trains come, throughout the system, impacting all customers. A complete closure of the rail system at 10 p.m., the closure of 10 of our lowest ridership stations, turning back trains on the red and silver lines, and then a broad-based fare increase of 20% on basically all of our fares and parking rates. Metro Access, as the fixed route network, particularly on the bus side, as that service area is reduced, the proposal also includes reducing the service area for Metro Access customers. I'll go into a little bit more detail on that in a moment. And again, Metro's cost structure means severe service cuts are necessary in order to significantly reduce costs, and costs of that magnitude will, by definition, have severe impacts on our customers. So to the extent possible, the proposal focuses the service cuts on nights, weekends, and areas where we can preserve as much ridership as possible. But again, there's nothing good about any of these reductions. Each of these elements reduce cost by reducing effectively the scope of the overall rail system, less service, fewer stations, and shorter hours of service. So the cost savings come not just from fewer operators and station managers, but also by reducing the number of stations, rail cars, elevators, and escalators, and other things that are maintained for service. Importantly, the proposed reductions are interconnected, and the plan and the associated estimates and projections are a package, not a menu of potential reductions. Reducing the hours that the system is open, again, one way to reduce operating costs and shrink the size of the rail network. The proposal includes closing the entire rail system at 10 p.m., the time period that corresponds with typically our lowest ridership. Closing at 10 p.m. reduces service hours by about 12%, and would negatively impact about 6 million customers. And of course, those customers would not have rail service at all as the system would be closed. In particular here, this will impact our late night, evening, overnight workforce that rely on the rail system to get to and from work, and obviously have some significant damaging impacts on our late night economy, and severely limit Metro's capacity to serve special events, concerts, sporting events, and that sort of thing. It also pushes potentially more people traveling to the road network, increasing the region's safety, potential safety incidents. The proposal also includes closing 10 of our lowest ridership stations to again get at some of those fixed costs and reduce operating and maintenance costs. This would completely eliminate access for customers at those locations. And depending on which stations are closed, we estimate that's about 5 to 6 million customer trips that would be negatively impacted. Our proposal includes closing the lowest or 10 low ridership stations without closing 2 consecutive stations, and to evaluate ridership between essentially September of this year and through the fall and winter, and inform a recommendation to the board based on level ridership through that time period. Proposal also includes turning back half of Red Line trains at Grosvenor and Silver Spring. Metro has done this in the past in order to provide, more frequency in the core. This basically means that every other train turns around at Grosvenor and Silver Spring, and that half the service level that's provided will be provided to the branches beyond those 2 locations. So, for example, at Wheaton Station or Rockville on the western branch of the Red Line. Again, this combined with other changes will have dramatic impacts on customers. This by itself, we estimate would impact about 10.5 million customer trips. Similarly, the proposal includes turning back Silver Line trains at our Stadium Armory station. So Silver Line trains would would travel from Ashburn, connect at Dulles International Airport, travel through the core of the system, and then turn at Stadium Armory. The Blue Line would remain in service and serve the segment beyond Stadium Armory to downtown Largo. But the Silver Line would no longer serve that segment of the system. This would reduce again the scheduled runtime of the Silver Line and get again at some of those fixed costs. We would also include. We are also including in the proposal the operation of 6-car trains on the Silver Line in order to support reliable turnback operations at the pocket track beyond Stadium Armory that's required to turn trains around. our, again, projection of the number of customers negatively impacted by this is about 4.1 million. And again, those are the customers on the branch between Stadium Armory and downtown Largo that would receive about half the service as the rest of the segment. The proposal includes reducing frequency, so trains would come significantly less often across the entire system all day and all week. The base train service throughout the system on weekdays would be 15 minutes, and on weekends, 20 minutes. This is a substantial reduction in service across, again, all day and all week, and across the whole system, impacting every one of our Metrorail customer trips. And that's projected at about 121 million for next year. The reductions in service frequency, so how often the trains are coming, varies depending on day of week and where you are in the system because of the integrated network. But they range from 17% reduction to 67% reductions on weekdays, and up to about 70% reductions on weekends. Importantly here, the strategic transformation plan that the general manager described earlier includes a metric and a target associated with 6-minute or better service, striving to provide on the rail system as much 6-minute or better service as we can to our customers. Our FY24 approved budget and the associated rail service plan, we estimate that's about 80% of our rail customers would receive 6-minute or better service. This proposal would bring that percentage all the way down to 10%, again, with most customers only receiving 15 or 20-minute service. The numbers here, from a how often the trains come standpoint, mask what will be a major challenge if this comes is unfortunately implemented, and that is crowding throughout the system. So this removes our peak period, higher frequency, more trains per hour service, and we would expect to not be able to carry the same number of customers as we can with today's system. On bus service, similarly, to save this level of, or to reduce costs by this level to close a deficit of this size, the proposed budget includes an overall reduction in service of about 33% for bus, spread across the whole region. The proposal, again, focuses on minimizing impact to customers by directing the cuts to the lowest productivity routes. But to sufficiently address costs and reduce costs, the cuts are very severe. The lowest productivity routes would be eliminated entirely. So I mentioned before that 67 routes across the whole region. Other routes with below average productivity, so high cost, low ridership, we'll see a range of service reductions, which include reducing buses come, reducing the hours of operation, including things like eliminating late night service on some routes, eliminating weekend service, or by consolidating routes that have overlapping segments. For the most productive, the highest ridership bus routes, the proposal generally seeks to maintain service, but again, with some truncations and where transfers are possible, reductions in service on those lines as well. On this next slide, display a map across the region, and the legend there, the red lines on the map are eliminations of service, so you can see across the whole region, complete elimination of service for Metrobus customers, and then the yellow represents reductions in service on the remaining lines. And again, those reductions range across the lines and across the service, up to about 3/4 of the service that would remain. So again, severe reductions even in those bus lines and routes that would remain. And so for Metro Access, the current Metro Access service area extends beyond the federally required 3/4 of a mile service from fixed route bus and rail stations. This proposal would shrink the Metro Access service area to the federally required guidelines after implementing the rail and bus service reductions that I just described. We're estimating that would reduce the number of Metro Access trips by about 20% and impact about 9,000 customers who take about 320,000 trips. Of course, this is a severe reduction of service that's provided to our eligible customers for Metro Access, many of whom rely on this service to get to and from work, medical appointments, travel needs, and many of whom are among our most vulnerable customers and most vulnerable in our region. This is a particularly damaging and somber element of our forced proposal here. Overall, we estimate that about 23 million of our customers would lose access and lose their trips entirely from eliminated bus routes, closed rail stations, and reduced hours of operation. Everyone across the whole system, all customers, will face longer waits, crowding, difficult transfers with long wait times. And of course, this will result in decreased access to jobs accessible by transit, and a much less connected region and a much less useful transportation network. And supporting the regional economy and things like nightlife and regional events becomes nearly impossible from a transit perspective. The illustration here is an example of the service that a customer would see at Navy Yard Ballpark headed towards Greenbelt on the Green Line on the weekend. And so this customer just missed a train headed northbound and has to wait 19 minutes, and then the following train after that would be 20 minutes later at 39 minutes. This is clearly much different than the service that they're experiencing today during the peak period, 6-minute service, and at other times 8-minute service. The proposal also includes as we mentioned, an across-the-board 20% fare increase. This is on the base simplified fare structure that the board and Metro adopted last year. So the $2 base bus and rail fare would increase to $2.40. The maximum rail fare would increase to $7.20 from $6. And then all other fares, including the Metro Access fare, would increase by 20%. The Metro Access fare to $4.80, which is twice that new or proposed $2.40 base fare. We've included here the estimates of the ridership impact from this level of fare increase and the revenue impact. Importantly, this is built off of the service reductions. So the service reductions result in much lower ridership and much lower revenue. We then apply this 20% increase and lose an additional 12 million riders, but generate projected 28.6 million more revenue from higher fares.
Thank you, Tom. After taking into account the severe fare increases and service cuts, Metro would have a balanced budget, but ultimately a much less useful system at a great detriment to customers and to the region as well. Starting from the $750 million gap, Metro's internal efficiencies generate net savings of about $124 million, and the preventive maintenance transfer increase would further reduce the gap by $193 million. With $60 million in the base, that would total about $253 million. The service cuts that Tom just described, along with proportionally deep administrative reductions, result in a $500 million decrease in operating expenses, while the revenue loss from the major service cuts, including non-passenger revenue impacts, totals about $95 million. The fare and parking increase would generate about $29 million more in revenue for a net savings of about $433 million, and thus closing the FY25 deficit. Without a sustainable funding source, the FY25 proposed budget presents an unrecognizable Metro due to the unprecedented service cuts necessary to close the gap and operating deficits through internal levers. This arguably the most impactful slide in the deck. The impact of this reduction to the operating budget will include much more than reduced service and increased fares. It will require reducing over 2,200 FTEs and greatly degrade Metro's workforce capabilities, impacting safety and security, convenience, reliability, and compliance. FTEs reduced will range from frontline managers and administrative personnel and would impact both union and non-represented employees. Customers will likely experience longer wait times on platforms and bus stops, trains and buses, and reduced MTPD presence. These budget cuts may potentially reduce escalator and elevator availability because of breakdowns, could impact compliance and audit standards, reduce bus, rail, and access vehicle reliability, and weaken cybersecurity measures. The 25 proposed operating budget totals a little less than $1.8 billion, or is 23% lower than the FY24 due to severe service cuts. At $310 million, passenger revenue is projected to be 23% lower than FY24, and non-passenger revenue is projected to decrease by about 12%. The budget includes the remaining $95 million one-time carryover to help close the gap. In conclusion, these severe cuts make using transit more difficult and less reliable, impact mobility options for all riders, including those that depend on transit for work, medical appointments, and grocery store runs, and degrade Metro's ability to deliver timely and predictable service while making Metro unrecognizable to our customers.
Thank you. Mr. Chair, the capital program section of the presentation is very similar to the preview we presented last month. So we'll move through this fairly quickly and then save time for some questions. So Metro's capital program, again, just in summary, advances projects and maintenance programs to restore and reinvest in the system. It also includes preventive maintenance transfers from the operating budget. The system is, the capital program is really designed to improve the state of good repair of the system, reliability, safety, and performance of the rail, bus, and access system. Importantly, we've included in the proposed program reductions to capital program administrative and program management expenses by $25 million annually. Again, keeping with our financial stewardship and making sure that that we can maximize investment in that state of good repair work in the current year and into the 6-year program. Our capital program is structured with a 1-year capital budget that is essentially the cash flow forecast for the next year, a 6-year adopted capital program that's the plan for investment for the next 6 years, and that's financially constrained with what we project will be available for that 6-year period. and then an unconstrained 10-year capital plan.
Thank you, Tom. So Metro receives funding through federal grants and from varied contributions made by the jurisdictions and the state level as well, and from the proceeds from debt bond issuances. Collectively, these sources total just over $11 billion for the 6-year CIP and address the state of good repair, safety, and reliability of Metro's infrastructure and vehicles. The ability to issue the capital program comes with the existence of dedicated funding. However, dedicated funding also services the debt issuances, and there's a limit to how much debt can be issued before the amount of dedicated funding to service debt is exhausted. The current limit is approximately $409 million, which is estimated to be met in FY28. Meaning no debt can be issued starting in FY29 under the proposed construct. The estimated debt issuance capacity is subject to future market conditions, availability of other funding sources, and the timing of issuances.
So the region and the federal government's investment in Metro's capital program has allowed Metro to reinvest in the state of good repair and the reliability and the performance of the system. The estimated backlog of overdue work has come down as a result of that reinvestment in the system. And Metro, our customers in the region, have seen improved performance. A couple of examples here of improved escalator performance, reduced smoke and fire incidents that have a relationship to the reinvestment in those assets and infrastructure, and that's consistent in those places where we've made those data good repair investments. Partly resulting from that, we've seen record levels of rail customer satisfaction and increasing and growing rail and bus ridership. With the capital program structure, a 6-year capital program with a 10-year unconstrained capital investment plan. Our estimate for the needs to be the system that the region should have for the next 10 years is about $24 billion. The 6-year estimate, again constrained by time, brings that total to $17 billion, and our financial constraints limit our capacity to $11 billion for the 6-year period. As those financial and funding constraints become a reality, our ability to execute proactively state of good repair reinvestment in the system will go down. That begins towards the end of our current 6-year capital program. And this slide depicts our projection of what will be the overdue work as that investment level goes down. And of course, with aged and worn out infrastructure and equipment, the reliability and the performance of the system will decline. And then ultimately that increases risk of reliability issues and safety issues. So we, again, are constrained to the point where major new projects, new initiatives, and new investments will not advance. The capital program proposed for the next 6 years focuses on delivering on existing commitments, projects, and programs underway. But there is limited capacity for those proactive state of good repair programs in the next round and next phases of those efforts, and no capacity for replacement projects like the Western Bus Garage, which is the next up for replacement modernization and our zero emission transition. There is very limited resource for planning for the next generation signaling system, no dollars for implementation of that program, And similarly, many of our strategic investments remain unfunded and are at risk as a result of those financial capacity constraints. We discussed last month that this proposal includes the reduction and rescoping of the planned heavy repair and overhaul facility for rail cars. That continues to be part of this proposal. If the investment levels are not increased in the future, and we continue to consider using capital funding for operations and maintenance costs in the operating budget, our programs to advance the 8000 series railcar fleet of the future for replacement and potentially future expansion railcars, and our zero emission bus program to transition our fleet to zero emission and support some of the region's environmental goals, both very much at risk of not advancing further. And we mentioned the advanced signaling system as well as our long-term blue, orange, silver corridor capacity improvements, and neither of those are funded for implementation. The next 6 slides do cover what is included in our capital program. And again, this is the continuation largely of projects, programs, and contractual commitments already underway, focused primarily on state of good repair, replacement, and rehabilitation efforts. We've included here both the 6-year projection included in the capital program for each of the 6 categories, as well as the forecast for next fiscal year, and importantly, the amount of deferred investment in each category. So in railcar and railcar facilities, primarily vehicle acquisition, facility state of good repair activities, and railcar rehabilitation and scheduled maintenance programs. In rail systems, the focus here again is on the state of good repair of train control systems, power systems, and other communication systems in the rail system, like radio infrastructure and equipment. In track and structures, continuing our state of good repair programs and rehabilitation and repair programs for track, tunnels, bridges, and structures. And these are some of the proactive state of good repair programs that become at risk as our financial capacity declines in the future. Stations and passenger facilities, again, largely focused on state of good repair and some modernization efforts following through on existing commitments and the current phases of those state of good repair efforts in station systems and things that are behind the scenes in stations. Not a lot of capacity for or no capacity for station improvements or enhancements beyond the current program. Bus and bus facilities. So we are continuing our bus acquisition and rehabilitation programs, again, advancing the first phases of our zero emission bus acquisition and facility programs. Northern Bladensburg bus garage replacements are included in the program, as well as the electrification of Cinderbed Road, as well as some state of good repair investments and modest modernization efforts in bus passenger facilities like bus shelters and customer information. And then some of the behind the scenes work, the things that are required to make the system work. We have some antiquated software systems that are that the replacement and modernization of are underway today. So those remain in the program. The deferred investment is largely the next round of those modernization of efforts of obsolete systems and technology, and those will be deferred until there is financial capacity to advance them. We will be in reactive mode in many of these support systems in the later part of the 6-year capital program. And this final capital slide summarizes investment planned by category for the budget year and for the 6-year period, and includes our estimates of revenue loss from capital projects and dedicated service, debt service for dedicated funding, and the estimates for next year and the 6-year period.
Thank you, Tom. So I'll just go through a summary and timeline and some challenges as well. Metro has generated over $100 million of administrative and operational efficiencies. Earlier in the presentation, I went through the salary and wage freeze for non-reps, Local 689 and 922 employees, and also the cost efficiency task force savings of about $50 million. In addition to that, we've also worked on capital administrative efficiencies in FY25 for a total of about $113 million. So we still continue to do that work and push on both capital and operating efficiencies. For the FY25 budget, Metro's combined operating and capital budget are proposed at $4.5 billion, approximately $273 million lower than FY24. Specifically, the operating budget of $1.9 billion funds the operations and maintenance of Metro's transit services, with $670 million for Metro Bus, about $960 for Metro Rail, and about $157 million for Metro Access, with significant service cuts and fare increases across all modes. The operating budget also includes about $72 million for debt service on gross revenue bonds used for the prior capital investments and about $15 million in reimbursable projects. With a capital budget of about $2.6 billion, Metro continues to focus on safety in the Metro Rail's train control system, tunnel leak mitigation, and station rehabilitation. Just for a few examples, with a budgeted about $558 million to be invested in bus and bus facilities and paratransit as well. The bus network redesign will allow Metro to better align bus service to current and potential customers' needs, providing more frequent and competitive service where applicable.
Mr. Chair, and I'll wrap it up from here. So the board has seen this slide before, and again, the public, the budget milestones, you mentioned some of those in your comments about the process starting in January. A couple things I want to just highlight again, though. Due to this budget, we obviously have to implement a hiring freeze. We can't have potential layoffs of 2,300 people and keep hiring at the level we need to hire. That will cause significant problems as we attrit, depending on the month, up to 50 direct operations people a month, let alone all the other positions here. We also, because of our collective bargaining agreement, will give formal potential layoff notice to our unions starting in January. Again, it usually takes 5, 6, 7 months, depending on the union and the position, to actually get to those layoffs. If it happens, there's a lot of things what we call internally things like bumping rights. So someone with seniority could move to a different division. It's really hard to map out exactly or linearly how that happens. So it does take months for that to happen. Again, then we come back to the board, you do the public process. We look forward to hopefully adopt a budget in April. We have our federal grant process that we have to need our budget done, so we could go about that. And just as importantly, we have to get a pick done to deliver the service for July 1st, knowing how many people will work here, therefore what service level we ultimately would put out on the street. The next slide highlights the proposed subsidy allocation table. We talked through this before. The part in blue really highlight here the last column in what's called jurisdictional contribution. That is actually the assumed level in the budget, and that is basically this year's current budget with the 3%. And so you'll see how those numbers flush out. Obviously, DC and Maryland do it a little differently than Virginia on, if you will, how the bill gets ultimately paid per se. But the numbers are very clear. The part that is really important here is the second table on the right. So the right, we want to be very transparent. These are numbers we're working with all of our partners on. But the first column, service cuts and fare increases, which basically represents the investment needed from those jurisdictions to eliminate the need for service cuts or fare increases. And that's in that column. The next column, so the farthest right, would be how to eliminate service cuts, fare increases, and not use capital money for the operations transfer. So obviously that basically is the highest level, and therefore gets us into the fully funded budget, and we don't have to use any capital into the operating side. So the only point I want to highlight here is it's not exactly one-to-one. We've talked about this before. There's so many interdependencies. So as we don't do service cuts, we can actually use more capital PM transfer. Not that that necessarily is a good thing, by the way, but they are just connected. A second part is, as we don't do service cuts, as an example, the same level of fare increase would generate more revenue because we will lose revenue because people won't be riding the system if the service isn't to the appropriate level. So they are all different levels that are levers that touch each other, and there's no way to say if there's 5 things and one's 10 million and 10 million and 5 million, the second we change one, they all change. Hence why it's an infinite amount of scenarios that would to do all this. So that's why the team worked so hard to kind of lay this out in a transparent, clean way. And then lastly, again, this challenge slide. As the chair mentioned, we have by law to pass a balanced budget under the Metro Compact. That has to be effective for July 1st. This, again, is not the budget we prefer to be putting out. I know it's not the budget that the board would love to be listening to and going to have for consideration, but it is currently in our fiduciary responsibility what we have. We do have to get the 3% subsidy growth cap adjusted. And again, the word adjusting is really important. I also want to highlight that needs to get adjusted. Even if we don't do the entire level needed, we do need the adjustment on the base to be at the full FY26 level, or the cap would have to get adjusted again in FY26. So those two things have to work well together. We appreciate there's a lot of elected officials, I know on the Maryland and Virginia side, that are contemplating how to go about that, and they're working on that, and we very much appreciate that. And I know a lot of board members have been working on that as well. The calendar, we all know, doesn't align well. The piece interesting on this calendar too is we have a CBA with our largest union, A9 and 922, that expires at the end of June, which then further complicates from a scheduling point of view. It's just all the layers kind of come together from the stars alignment, if you will. And then obviously, as I mentioned, is the staff reduction and the hiring freeze. Again, just want to reiterate the hiring freeze part. The more certainty we can get, the less significant the hiring freeze becomes, or the more targeted it gets, and therefore the less impactful to service. So very much appreciate, Board Member McAndrews here from Maryland. The MDOT put out some stuff last week. Appreciate the governor and the MDOT on showing, it looks like $150 million contribution to WMATA. I know that there's other jurisdictions moving through different ideas. Governor Youngkin's budget's next week in Virginia. Governor Moore's budget, I think, is towards the third week in January. So again, as we get more certainty from our partners, we'll have a better understanding of how that hiring freeze will work or not work, and then how to move forward with adjusting these plans. So lots of work ahead. But again, thank you for all your time and effort, and we look forward to your discussion, advice, and moving forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Randy, and thank you, Tom and Yutende. I know how much work you've been putting into all of this, and this isn't necessarily the budget you want to present to us, all of you, but we do appreciate your work. That was incredibly comprehensive. Why don't I open it up for questions and comments? We'll go to members of the committee first, and then open it up to the whole board. You want to kick us off, Sarah? Okay, Director Klein.
I actually don't have any questions because, as Matt said, this is incredibly comprehensive, and we've seen a lot of it before. It's been previewed really well and transparently. Tracy said on the joint development, this is good. I mean, it pretty much sums it up to say this is bad. But I do think that you, Randy, and the staff have really done all of us a favor to lay out the situation that we're facing. The balanced budget is required, and this is what it looks like at the moment. Obviously, these cuts would be devastating for the people who work here, who run the system, and who use the system every day. I've been trying to get my head around this to sort of summarize what it means in a way that makes sense to me. And I keep coming back to what's called the network effect, which is kind of a wonky concept that means that an infrastructure network is really greater than the sum of its parts, right? So think about it in the context of telephones. When the first telephone was created, one telephone, it really wasn't useful at all because you couldn't call anybody else. When you add a second telephone, suddenly it becomes useful, right? You add 2 more telephones and you've more than doubled the possibilities of the telephone, and it expands from there. And transit works the same way. You have 1 bus stop, you can't get anywhere. If you have 2, you can. The more you add on, the more impact that has, and the greater the possibilities. It just increases exponentially. But it also works in reverse. So when you're cutting a transit system, cutting half the bus routes, you're taking away so many opportunities, so many possibilities. It's more than what it looks like on paper, I guess is the way I'm starting to think about it. And so as folks are looking at this, I think we'll all be looking at like which bus route is being cut, which station is looking at being closed or whatever. But to some extent, we have to keep in mind, all of us, that this affects the entire region. Bus stop over here, a station over there that gets closed. But that station being closed affects someone over here and vice versa. So I know we've all talked about getting together regionally and including the federal government, hopefully in that as well, to figure out how to deal with this. And obviously that's really important. So that's one observation. The other is not just the board and the general manager, the region as a whole have known this is coming for years, right? And here we are 6 months out from when the budget happens, like 1 month out from when people are starting to get notices of layoffs and things like that. We have to figure out a way to deal with this long term so that we're not constantly coming up against a crisis. I mean, I'm reminded of Congress, where we've had how many shutdown crises in the last couple of years, and we're facing 2 more in the next couple of months. It undermines people's trust in Congress when you lurch from crisis to crisis. I mean, we know how people feel about Congress. It undermines people's trust in our ability to provide service when we're lurching from crisis to crisis. So I'm not sure how to address this, but if there's any moment at which to address this for the long term, this is it. And my last observation that I wanted to share is, I know we talk a lot about Metro, obviously, and what it means to this region. I work in my day job with a lot of transit agencies around the country. The workforce crisis has been significant across the country. People can't find operators. People can't find people, folks to run the buses. And it has resulted in actual service cuts around the country since the pandemic. WMATA has done a great job of recruiting and retaining operators. Really, my observation is we haven't had to deal with the types of service challenges that other places have, because we've really been able to get a lot of operators in, get them trained, get them on the street. We start having to, let folks go and not replace them. It is going to take us a long time to catch back up. It's going to be a long tail from whatever we do in the next few months. So those are my 3 observations. And I think we can do it as a region. I think ultimately, it's not going to be a solution without some pain. I think fares are ultimately probably going to be, going up. There will be some service adjustments, but we have to do better than this budget. So.
Thank you. Mr. McAndrew.
Thank you, Chair. I will plus Board Member Klein and go a little bit deeper on the Maryland context. Appreciate the staff's time over many, many months running many scenarios and the GM's approach to this. I think it's been transparent. We know what the issues are. We know what the challenges are. But I think I've got confidence that this not happen. I wish that I could say I've got confidence that we can go ahead and flip the script, and tomorrow we can go ahead and throw this in the dumpster fire and start on a new budget. But unfortunately, due to the nature of our region's budgeting process and how we pay for WMATA, that's just not viable. But I think I've got confidence that this region will rise to the occasion. Randy provided a vision for the future that's very capital intensive as well as operating intensive. But we've got to deal with the here and now, and we're ultimately being asked to pay more for the same, right? And that's the tough challenge that the region's facing at a time when our budgets are tight, and we've got to go ahead and tighten our belts. But as the GM said, Maryland Governor Moore and Secretary Wiedefeld last week released information on our forthcoming capital budget and our operating budget, where we showed that we're going to make some hard decisions and provide $150 million next year, in addition, on top of our operating subsidy. If you guys can go to slide 95. That's not the full 209, but this is what we could afford. We're making very hard decisions to be able to provide that. Cuts to other services that we provide throughout the state, but trying to maintain core services here in the DMV as well as in the Baltimore metro area. In the out years, we're aiming to get to the full 250 that's needed to ensure that we can provide quality service as well as quality wages for the workforce. This was a very hard decision, but the governor knows how important transit is to the state of Maryland, to our residents, to our family, for our ability to be the greenest and cleanest state in the country, for our students' ability to get to an education, for our employees' ability to access jobs, including those that will be going to Greenbelt soon to access a job at the FBI headquarters, and our dedicated workforce. We've got to have their back. I want to acknowledge, why or where we landed at 150. And I said this a couple months ago in a board meeting. It's wild to sit here 5 years on from when the region did the heroic and found the dedicated funding for the first time in our history for the transit system. And now we're 5 years later scalping that budget to keep the lights on. And I think, with the decisions we have before us, maybe that's what we have to do, but I don't think we should, nor does the governor or the secretary. And that's why we put out 150 in hopes that we do not maximize that transfer of capital funding to operating to keep the lights on. And I'm encouraged by recent conversations with my board colleagues and partners in Virginia and DC that they'll be able to get to where we need to get to make sure that budget on the left doesn't happen. But there's a lot of work that we have to do together as one region to get there. So no questions, but thought I'd provide a few remarks.
Okay. Other members of the, I'm the only member of the committee. I will save my comments for last. Other members of the board. Director Lowe.
Okay, I have some small questions, and then I'll pivot to my key takeaways and some bigger questions. On the capital program slides, on the right-hand side, as you go through by category, there on each slide there was a dollar figure labeled deferred investment. I just want to make sure I understand what is the deferred investment? Is that the biggest circle, the 27 billion one, or like what are those numbers supposed to add up to, and what is the deferred investment?
Yeah. So thank you for the question. So you're referring to the bottom right there. That each of those conceptually adds up to the difference between the 17 billion financially unconstrained 6-year plan and the 11 billion financially constrained 6-year plan. And what's included in that are a number of the projects and programs that we described as not having financial capacity to advance.
And that's the 10-year plan or the 6-year capital? Okay. So we have the blue circle, the dark blue circle, which is the 6-year constrained plan. Then we have the green circle, which is the unconstrained plan, which is everything we need for state of good repair, plus some modernization projects. And the difference between the two is labeled on subsequent slides as deferred investment. Got it. Okay. If we go to slide 95, The district's share of the operating gap has ranged from 40 to 44%, depending on the various scenarios we've looked at over the last few months. I'm starting to understand that there's a few key reasons why that share varies. That we're not applying the 3% cap to the gap for starters, and so just like the formula is yielding that. But also that ridership is an input to the formula. And so if the ridership model is yielding an input that that essentially is like heavy in the formula toward the district, it's going to produce a higher share. Are there any other inputs to the formula besides ridership that could help leaders in the district understand why this share is high and in some scenarios higher?
Thank you for your question, Dr. Liu. So as we work through the subsidy model, some of the other criteria used includes population density in the area, includes metro bus geo-distribution. Without going into the weeds too much, typically when we change bus service, the amount of service provided in the district versus Virginia versus Maryland also changes depending on the routes that are reduced. Those changes also impact or inform the model and inform how much subsidy is due from each of the jurisdictions.
So a service cut that was heavy on bus, for example, would like disproportionately impact the district, and so the cost of undoing that service cut also disproportionately falls on the district. And that just makes sense.
That's accurate.
There are a couple other factors. Maybe you should, because there's the new rail survey, fares, all that kind of. Maybe just for sake of transparency to Board Member Lowe, maybe feel free to add a couple more details on there. Tom, you might know that piece on those things maybe a little bit better, but or you tend to whoever has that.
Yeah, there are a number of inputs, and as we were talking about in the broader budget, they all interrelate, so it becomes very challenging to explain. But ridership by jurisdiction is estimated based on survey results. So we've recently done the rail passenger survey update. Yetunde mentioned the population density, the levels of service, the amount of fare revenue collected by mode, rail, bus, and access, and by type of bus service can vary within each annual update of the subsidy allocation model. So there are a number of inputs that have a relationship to each other, and when the team puts the proposal together, recalculates all of that, and then this compares it back to the prior.
Okay, thanks for that. I have two key takeaways. Like the first is that it's clear that an imperative is to avoid service cuts if at all possible. I thought the telephone analogy was very vivid. Thank you, or metaphor, and thank you for that. Right, the problem with, and Joe, your point about like paying more to get the same. So like it could be paying more to get less, right? and service cuts are what determines that, because every service cut that we make decreases the value of transit to the region, and that is the doom loop. So we need to do everything we can to avoid service cuts if at all possible. And it is really important that we help our appointing authorities and other stakeholders understand that service cuts are a serious problem and not a responsible part of the solution, because I am hearing many people say that. So I think that we all have our work cut out for us in explaining what the real doom loop is and how our fingers are on the trigger. I think I knew that already, but I am really feeling it right now. My second key takeaway is that this presentation has made it clear to me in a new way that WMATA is already doing more with less. And I have been very critical of various things that WMATA has done over the years. But my sense right now is that the results speak for themselves, and WMATA is well managed. And I think that's something that's important to say out loud. And I view part of my role as just telling the truth as I see it, and that is my independent assessment. Specifically regarding everything we can possibly do to avoid service cuts, could we look at slide 72, which is actually a slide from the appendix, so we haven't shown it publicly. It's the fare comparisons. Okay, sorry, it's not slide 72, I get it. This must be renumbered. Exactly, yeah, it's in the appendix. No, oh, there we go. Yes. Okay, so now it's slide 103. Sorry, in the version of the board book that I actually read, it was slide 72. Okay. This is a really helpful slide, so I just wanted to surface this one. I think that I see two things stand out to me on this slide. So the first is that our current base is at the lower end of what we see in this national transit fare comparison. And so it seems reasonable to, as the general manager's budget proposes, put an increase to the base on the table. I think that we should go up to 25%. The current proposal is 20, but I look at this, a key takeaway for me from this is like 250 would be reasonable for the base, and that we should set that as the outer envelope of what we get public comment on and explore, so that we have maximum flexibility when we are really down to making a decision about what the fare policy will be and what the service level will be. Let's give ourselves the maximum flexibility. I'm not suggesting that we commit right now to doing that, but if we don't put it on the table, then it's not going to be an option. Similarly, the other thing that really stands out here is how very low our max fare is relative to our heavy and commuter rail peers. And so I'm not sure 25% is enough in that case. And I think we may need to look at a much bigger possible number, because the long distance rides in the system are the most highly subsidized rides. And we need to recover all costs possible. So I'm not sure 25% is enough here. And I'd like to poll the group in terms of, is there interest on the board in seeing the envelope in terms of what's possible that we take to public comment, move to a 25% increase to the base fare to $250, and to potentially increasing the possible maximum fare even more. I'd love to hear from others on that.
Well, what I think we're going to do is, so at the next meeting, I'm going to ask everyone to bring forward all of their proposed changes, and then we'll just go right down the list, and anything that gets majority support we'll put on the docket. That's kind of what our process has been. So I think it's good to raise it, give everybody a heads up that that's what you're thinking, and we can continue those conversations. As I said in my kind of comments, I'm more open to putting as much as possible on the table for the public docket so that we have options. So I don't have any issues with doing that necessarily, but we'll have everybody kind of come to the table at the next meeting and be ready for that discussion. Does that work?
Yeah. Along those lines, we don't currently have a list of which 10 stations we are proposing to close. And I assume that the public docket will need to specify an actual 10 stations. I think the principle that is proposed in this is that those 10 stations will be selected based on ridership. I'm interested to hear from others about whether they think that's the right criteria and if that's the general principle that we want to proceed on as a group.
Well, I think that's the general manager's proposal in principle. Whether that's ours is up to us. Do you want to comment on that aspect specifically? And then I think, what I'm trying to do is sort of separate your proposal and then how we're going to potentially manipulate it.
Yeah, I think that's I mean, as of today, when we wrap up here in a few minutes, the budget becomes yours. So the public process, we've done everything we can to take your input, our jurisdictional partners' input, run the numbers, what the numbers are, and as I think, hundreds of years of transit experience of our team and people that are very passionate about what we do and use the system every day, trying to balance, like as Tom mentioned, help as most people as we can with the money that we have available. So the methodology on station closures we put down was the lowest ridership stations, but not have two in a row, because depending on where you are in the region, that kind of geographically cuts off an entire region, where depending on where you are in a region, we have a very high park and ride aspect versus walk to station, where if you're in the core, it's a walk to or bus transfer kind of model. So the reason the stations are on there is because we gain a lot of fixed cost reduction with a station that service can't do. So if we just shut a station down, we have no station managers for the entire year, no police patrols in that station, turn off the elevator escalator, and all these other kind of things. So we can probably save a little over $1 million, I think it is, a year per a station. Proportionally, you got to cut a lot of service to get the same amount because it's variable. And so that's why we put it in there. I mean, we have to be honest. We have some stations. We have a very complex system, right? So like if you went to an MBTA or Chicago or New York, they have distinct urban transit versus commuter rail, regional rail that all work together, but they are distinctly different. We are both. And whether people want that or not, that's what we have. So we have stations that have very low volume ridership. They're incredibly important to the region and the people that use it and the economic aspect around that region, that could only have a few thousand people a day, or even a couple high hundreds a day. And some of these stations are in new areas that we just put online. So our goal is to grow that area. And then we have dense urban core stations, like a Navy Yard or Noma or a DuPont, where the entire community is metrocentric and most people live there car-free, or Columbia Heights car-free, car-light, and they are transit-dependent people. So we just wanted to have that blend, and we thought that methodology was a fair one to use, and we look forward, if the board has a different methodology for the docket, we will run the numbers what the board would like us to look at. Hopefully that, Chair, kind of answers that.
Yeah, and I think to Dr. Lowe's point, we may have a little bit different take on that, but I think our kind of work session would be the time to get into it.
Yeah, okay, that's something that makes sense. I think that it is going to be a tougher conversation than we think. And so I think that we should make sure that we allow ourselves plenty of time.
Good point.
Okay, that's it for me for public meeting.
Okay, other members of the board. Mr. Jummer and then Santos.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair. So I want to say and echo what our fellow board members have talked about with regard to the presentation. You've really told the story with convincing clarity, and that's most appreciated. And every series or every time you make this presentation, it gets better and it gets clear. I want to focus on one topic area where you drew my attention, Yatende. You mentioned that 22%, we're operating perhaps today with 22% fewer FTE per service mile than in the past. I think that's outstanding. I don't know if that was meant to be a negative or a positive. For me, it's certainly a positive. And I say that because efficiencies, cost savings, and cost avoidance are critical in our budget management from this point forward, and always has been. So the real question I have for you is, have we done a peer transit system analysis in comparison? How are we doing compared to them? And then secondly, do we have any specific targets that we're shooting for? And I put that in the context of where Dr. Lowe went, and she says, we've done more with less. And if we have, maybe this is an example of where we continue to move forward, especially in view of the fact that personnel, workforce costs is such a huge portion of our budget.
Thank you for your question, Board Member Drummer. Yes, we have done some comparisons, and some of those are featured in this presentation as well. When we take a look at our 5-year average costs compared to other transit agencies and also compared to the local jurisdictions around us, we are right about a 4.8% compared to regional peers of about 7%. So just looking at that, you can tell that our costs are on average lower than that of our regional peers. The same thing as well goes for the transit agencies, 4.8%. And I would add that this does include the major ad for the Silver Line Phase 2 stations and also for Potomac Yard. So from that perspective, I can infer directly that our pair comparison of the FTE per revenue mile is also in line with this average.
Okay, Santos.
Thank you. I too had a couple of questions and one comment. A little bit in the weeds first, start with the easier, which is my understanding is that the FY 2024 budget assumed that ridership would reach 70% pre-pandemic. And my understanding is that the estimates did not meet that target. So it's more of a question again. If your team is using the same model, I'm wondering if the inputs or the way how the model works, maybe pre-pandemic, could you speak to how it takes into account our changed environment of hybrid workforce and the other factors?
Thank you for the question. And I think one thing that's very important is the models we used prior to the pandemic don't really work anymore. The methodologies that we approached sort of got broken by the changing travel patterns and the nature of all day, all week travel. And so we have adapted our approach to estimating ridership. And while generally ridership is growing on rail and bus, bus has recovered much higher than 70%. So bus by itself, particularly on weekends, is approaching or at pre-pandemic levels. On rail, the growth has been different than our estimates and projections this time last year, or a few months ago this time last year. But this proposal includes a refresh of the ridership projections as well as adjustments for changes in the average amount that our customers pay to reflect that updated projection. And so that's included in this deck and in some of the detail as well.
I just wanted to add it, that we should always try as best we can to separate ridership and fare revenue, because they're not the same thing. They used to be the same thing forever in our industry, but we have to acknowledge that we have people that don't pay. And we are doing everything we can to recover every fare, whether it's fare gates. On bus, we have new fare boxes we're putting in. We're doing a lot of citations, a lot of policing out there. But fare evasion here and across the country is at a much different level than pre-pandemic. So that is that one differential. And the second part that I think Tom was alluding to, but I guess a little more clarity to, is I think we're not far off from a ridership point of view in the model. We are off we were off to the model on the type of trip. So we estimated more long-haul trips this time last year for this year's budget than we currently have received. We are getting cautiously optimistic. That trend is starting. Parking use is starting to kick up. Earlier this month, we've had our 3 highest days of federal employees on the system, which is a good sign. We're told that in January, more federal employees will be back to the system. Our 3 highest days of federal employee taps were in December. So those trips tend to be medium to longer haul, therefore more of a $6 fare versus a $2 fare. The weekend fare has done an incredible job of inducing a lot of weekend trips. So we have more weekend probably than we thought in the model and a little bit less weekday. So I just wanted to, give that clarity to the public at large that they're not, it's not a one-to-one relationship between ridership and revenue, depending on the type of trip itself.
Thank you for the clarity. I have another question and comment, and then I'll close out. This is obviously my first board meeting, but I'm coming to the table here as someone who has worked in local economic development and thinks about cities and sustainability. I will say I previously had been a government official in the District of Columbia. I had served during the Fenty administration as the deputy mayor for planning and economic development. And I will say, from that vantage point, I remember all too well our efforts to attract companies to the region, accompanying Mayor Fenty and having calls, our team pitching different industries, whether it's tech and other companies to come into the city. And I know my fellow economic development officials in the region did the same. The most critical elements of our pitch has always been the reliability of transportation and obviously public services and the quality of services here. So I'm keenly aware of the importance. In that vein, can you speak to what the return on investment is on public sector contributions to WMATA, and or speak to the economic impact of WMATA? I know I've asked some of these questions in various forms before, but I think it's just important for people to be aware.
Tom, do you have so like for instance, the 3% of our regional land makes up about 30% of our property tax base, and that 3% is within a half a mile of a metro station. Queued you up so you had time to.
So unfortunately, I don't have the stats right in front of me, but we did have them in a prior presentation, and I'll say we've been updating some of that work and refreshing economic and environmental impact estimates, and we'll have more for the board over the next couple of months on stats and a report there. But definitely appreciate the need to explain the return on investment and both financial and for the broader regional goals.
Thank you, because I think this really, I wholly agree with Board Member Klein's comments about the network effect. And basically what I'm asking is to put some numbers on it, because that will perhaps focus minds as well. I mean, in terms of understanding the direct impact on companies and obviously institutions in the region.
Okay. Mr. Smedberg.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Couple comments, questions, Tom and Yetunde, or maybe even for the general manager. There's clearly going to be shared sacrifice here, wherever we end up, and I'm confident we will end up in a better place than we're seeing here today. But the one thing that, I know we're going to have several, work sessions on various issues, but the one thing that pops out initially is, the non-rep is getting, no increase in all the work that you all do, your teams do. I'm thinking about the people who are not on the 8th floor and thinking of that and that sacrifice. We have the labor contracts coming up, but I think that, the localities have all increased their employees by, some percentage, because of the COVID crisis and coming out of that. But the repped employees, I don't think have had the same impact as the non-rep employees have had over the years since, say, 20 or 21. Is there any kind of comparison that we have there initially right now to maybe highlight that a little bit? And the impact that would have, because I'm considering not only the service cuts, but potentially as Sarah and others have highlighted is, the workforce impacts as well. Because
Certainly.
people do have options.
Yeah, well, Mr. Chair, I appreciate you recognizing the staff and how much they have done, not only just in the last year, but obviously got us through an amazingly difficult time with the pandemic. Everyone really worked really hard on that. So thank you for doing that. As the slide showed, where we talked about $38 million savings with the zero increase next year, non-rep employees are obviously easier to do that because we can say that we're doing that. Non-rep employees have received about a 10% compounded increase since 2021. So probably not actually to the full level of inflation since 2021. If you look at some of our other larger unions, again, great people that are working hard and doing good work every day, but the largest ones would be 689 and 922 with their contracts. They, for the same amount of time, compounded about 21% compared to non-rep. And then FOP, which is our police union, and 639 is our special police. They are kind of in the middle there, and I think 16 and a little over 10 on the special police. So again, not every group monolithic, but there has been a fair amount of shared sacrifice. Non-rep employees at this organization before I got here had years with zero increases. We had a big meeting yesterday. I think a lot of people have said pretty clearly, we know we got to be part of this, and protecting service is what they care the most about because the mission. But yeah, the numbers, non-rep are actually about 50% less than actually rep positions over the since.
Yeah, and that's why I'm sort of asking because I remember those years when I first joined the board, and it was zero. So just making sure that's out there. Also, to appreciate the emphasis on administrative costs, because again, everyone has to come to the table with something. I think we're hearing that loud and clear from our federal delegation to our state electeds, local elected, everyone involved. Everyone has to come to the table. So appreciate the emphasis on that. And there's obviously been a lot of focus on that. You and I have been in meetings, others have been in meetings where this has come up. So really appreciate the emphasis of that and presenting it in a clearer way with it all sort of together, as opposed to bits and pieces all over the presentation, I think. So that was helpful. Other just random comments, I think, look at not only the short term, but the longer term. And I think that's the key here, really. I'm pretty confident we're going to get to the short term. We obviously had Deputy Secretary McAndrew and others make positive statements coming out of Maryland. Hopefully the district in Virginia will have similar announcements at some point soon. But one thing we learned through the pandemic, that everyone values Metro and understands the importance of Metro to this region. So I'm hoping that if we do get to that short-term fix, the bridge here, that long-term discussion continues, that we come to some place that we can come to, a dedicated funding stream, whatever it is, even if it's one regional one, or if it's three different ones that get us to the same place, that conversation, I think, has to continue. The indexing piece, the fact that nothing is indexed here at WMATA, we're seeing it now in the dedicated funding, a real issue. The dollars are not worth what they were in 18. We need to do that. The rainy day fund, highlighting that, I was shocked when I first was able to participate as a board member, learning that this organization, or an organization of this size with its mission, did not have a rainy day fund. To me, was just shocking. I just couldn't believe that. So anyway, just some general comments, and I think we're going to have some very lively work sessions in the next couple of months.
Mr. McAndrew, you just had something quick you wanted to get in?
Yeah, I'll just be real quick. So Tracy, thank you for the fair discussion. I think that service and overall, no rock unturned here. But if we're going to have fair discussion, I think it would be good to get an update on the Metro Lift program, its success to date, and any plans that we have to make sure that it can be more successful in light of potential.
Okay. Couple brief comments and then just a few process thoughts. So I technically represent the Virginia jurisdictions on this board, and I think the message from them has been that they want to step up and help as much as they can. To varying degrees, there are challenging county budget situations, city budget situations, but all of them. I think virtually every elected official that we've interacted with, has been supportive and wants to help. So hopefully we'll get there. I think if we were to go around all of us and talk through the things that we like the least about this budget, we may have some different answers. But there's a lot of things. For me, I would really like to avoid any station closures. I think absolutely providing zero service is just the most drastic thing that we can do for a given station. And you think about just the assets that cost a lot of money to build, having no service, being completely dark, to me is even worse than longer headways and worse service. Understanding some of the caveats that the general manager said, I do want to ask a question on the station closure issue, because whatever that budgetary gain is, if the stations that are closed are the ones that have significant parking, then that's also a parking revenue loss for us. Are we factoring that into the numbers?
Yeah, the numbers include an estimate of parking revenue loss. Now, that may vary depending on what stations end up, again, if
being
at
addressed, yeah.
The nature of the ridership and the parking there. But they are the lowest ridership stations, so the parking will be relatively low at those stations. It's transit related.
Yeah, but they're also, if they're further out, they're probably higher fare stations as well, although albeit lower volume. So anyway, we'll get into all that. I've been talking a little bit to Ms. Ellison. I think from a process standpoint, we're going to try to set up some time for the board to just kind of talk through this and work through this. And then we have 2 meetings in January that we can utilize effectively as a work session on the 11th, and then moving towards finalizing what's going out to the docket on the 25th. So we're going to work together on identifying some times, and I know she'll be in touch with us to make sure that the board has time to work on this, bring forward everything we want to look at, and any potential changes that we may want to make. I know there's probably going to be some differing, like I said, priorities, philosophies on how to do this, but I'm sure we'll work through it. Okay, so I think that wraps up this discussion. Thank you again to staff for all the work here. And I'm not going to say we look forward to working on this, but I think my hope is that today is sort of the rock bottom discussion, and that the conversation that we're having will only get better from this point forward. So hopefully we're starting on the bottom, and we will work our way to the top by the end here. So with no further business to come before the committee, we will stand adjourned, and we'll take a break before our board of directors meeting. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Paul Smedberg. I'm chair of the WMATA board. Thank you for being here today at our board of directors meeting. Since we called the roll in an earlier committee meeting, we'll move right to the approval of the agenda. I'd like to consider the agenda approved as presented. Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Dr. Lowe. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? The ayes have it. Thank you. Now we have 3 sets of minutes for approval. The board meeting from November 16th and executive sessions from November 16th and November 30th. I'd like to consider these minutes approved as presented. Does anyone have any comments or objections to any of these sets of minutes? Hearing none, the minutes are approved as presented. Thank you. Today, our first employee spotlight recognizes this team's coordinated efforts in successfully locating and reuniting an elderly woman with her family. I'd like to ask the following employees to please stand. Metro Integrated Command and Communications Center Acting Assistant Supervisor or Superintendent Coco Tucker and Bus Supervisor Ernest Hendricks. Good afternoon. On December 6th, an MTPD sergeant in the command center received a call from the DC police seeking WMATA's assistance in locating a missing elderly woman. The call was promptly forwarded to the bus section in the command center, where Assistant Superintendent Tucker immediately disseminated the information to bus operators, street operators, operations, and bus supervisors within the vicinity. Bus Supervisor Ernest Hendricks, stationed at the Silver Spring Transit Center, reviewed the information and recognized that he had had interaction with the woman during his shift. He recalled that she had boarded a bus heading towards South Laurel Park and Ride. Knowing the urgency of the situation, Supervisor Hendricks immediately contacted the command center and spoke with Assistant Superintendent Tucker and provided her with the critical information. Ms. Tucker acted swiftly, assessing the live camera feed from the bus to verify the missing woman was on board. Confirming the woman's location on the bus, she promptly contacted the bus operator, instructing them to hold the bus and await the arrival of the bus supervisor and Montgomery County Police. The seamless coordination and quick response from the command center, bus supervisor Ernest Hendricks, and Montgomery County Police were instrumental in the successful location of the missing elderly woman, ensuring her safety and facilitating the return to her family. The coordinated efforts of all involved parties exemplify the commitment to the safety and well-being of our customers and the communities we serve. Please join us in thanking this team for their care, dedication, and superior customer service. And don't leave. Today's second employee spotlight also recognizes a team that collaborated across departments to develop and launch the Metro Lift program. Metro Lift launched on June 20th, 2023, providing 50% off fares for customers enrolled in the SNAP program. Enrolled customers are now taking 2,000 to 3,000 trips a day and have used the pass at all 98 rail stations and on over 100 bus lines. To date, over 6,000 customers have been approved, with enrollment continuing to grow and 250,000 trips taken overall. The program included a first-in-the-industry all-digital enrollment and distribution process, enabling customers to enroll online from a computer or a phone and have the discount automatically applied to the physical or virtual SmartTrip card. 70% of eligible customers have enrolled online so far. In addition, in-person enrollment has increased due to on-site events at social and human service offices, grocery stores, metro rail stations, and bus bays. And as of today, we'd also like to recognize the following representatives from those teams who have worked diligently to develop and launch this program. Will the following employees please stand? And this group I mentioned to you earlier, I'm going to do the best I can with the names here, so please accept my apologies prior to beginning. First, Ramano Mahan. Would you please stand? Ventakaraharan Naye Namni. Yep. And Sanktitha Verarahanya. Thank you. From the fair, and they're all with the information technology team, the fair engineering team, Dennis Wynn. Dennis. From Treasury, Tracy Foster. Tracy, good morning. Don Miles, sorry. And Jim Bongarino. Jim. Bonjour. And from Planning and Performance, Kaylee Campbell. McPherson Hughes Cromwick. From Government Relations, Charlie Scott. Charlie, are you still here? Yeah, there he is. Okay.
And he's back able to stand.
And from Customer Experience, Renee Cianciolo and Marcus Markle. The board extends its thanks and deep appreciation to you for all your work on the Metro Lift program. Now I'll ask all employee spotlight honorees to please join us for photos at the front of the room. Now we'll call on our in-person speakers. First to speak, and people have up to 3 minutes. Ms. Denise Rush.
2 minutes.
Or 2 minutes, I'm sorry.
I'm sorry, Denise wants to go last, sorry.
I'm sorry, Denise wanted to go last, I'm sorry, okay. Next will be Mr. Barry Wilson. Mr. Wilson.
Good afternoon, all. My name is Barry Wilson. I'm Recording Secretary and Organizer Director for ATU Local 689. ATU Local 689 represents over 15,000 transit workers and retirees across the DC metro area, including many dedicated and hardworking WMATA employees. As we all know, our members in our region face unprecedented challenges over the past few years. Nonetheless, transit workers have faithfully stayed on the job and kept our region afloat, even through the worst pandemic in over a century. Since then, we have seen increasing violence in the region as a whole. Let me be clear. Finding a solution to Metro's long-standing and systemic funding problem is essential. However, the solution cannot and must not fall on the backs of the working class people. It cannot fall on our members who were deemed frontline heroes. Additionally, it cannot fall on the working Washingtonians who need the reliable service to pick up their kids, go to work, and meet medical appointments, and also to navigate through this great region. Eliminating bus routes, laying off thousands of workers, and shuttering metro stations won't address the funding issue in the long term. Instead, it will turn a world-class metro transit system into a mid-grade commuter service. In the past, we have seen funds raided and then haphazardly added to cover up the glaring gaps in the system, both in operation and capital expenditures. This practice is no good for the long-term health of DC Metro. Likewise, consistently having Metro rely on appropriations instead of a single dedicated funding stream puts this cycles in fiscal crisis. Instead, it is time to finally implement a dedicated funding system. This requires every member of the Metro Compact working together in partnership. Our capital's transit system deserves dedicated funding and sustainable funding, and Washingtonians deserve better funded system. Moreover, 689 members and transit workers across the whole region deserve to know that their labor is recognized for being vital and truly appreciated. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker, Mike Golash.
I'd just like to make a couple of points. One is the way we describe the problems that Metro has. Metro provides a service for this region, and the local jurisdictions of the federal government have to pay for that service. This idea that we're subsidized, that's a misnomer. We are not subsidized. We provide a valuable service, and the local governments and the federal government have a responsibility to pay for that service. We should make that clear, this idea that we're sort of a stepchild, that we need some extra money. No, we're an essential service for the region. The second, I've talked to Sarah about this a number of times, we need to get a federal operating subsidy. We've had one 30 years ago, was abandoned. The way it's done is very simple. Every time a federal worker rides the trains, he pays a fare. It might be $2, it might be $3, but the true cost of that ride is maybe $5 or $6. We should calculate the difference between the true cost and the money the federal worker pays, and the federal government should grant that money to Metro. I think that's a way of getting a federal payment to help us solve our operating costs. To change the subject slightly, we talked about the workforce. One problem that is the issue of marijuana has become a serious issue for a lot of workers. We've got to resolve and treat marijuana not as a drug like cocaine or LSD, but rather like alcohol. If it doesn't impair your operating function, okay, you can, it's not a health issue. It's not endangering anybody. It should not be grounds for termination or suspension for long term. I think that will help solve some of our problems of recruiting people and also retaining people. And the last point is that if we go through all these cuts in terms of laying off thousands of people, it's really just a question of shifting costs, because those people lose their health insurance, they switch to Medicaid. They lose their income, they switch to unemployment insurance. They switch their ability to buy food, they get on SNAP. So instead of them providing a service to the community which is needed, they wind up being a liability which we have to fund. It's really irrational to perform in that way. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Golash. Aaliyah Joseph. Oh.
Was me, right?
Yeah, of course.
Okay, wonderful. So good morning, or now it's good afternoon, Chairman and distinguished members of the board. Thank you for making yourselves available for the important business of all the attendees at this meeting today. And I hope the issue that I intend to present will be one of the easier issues that requires your attention and assistance today. I reside at the Crestview condominium at 3601 Wisconsin Avenue Northwest, DC. Both the Crestview condominium and the ballet school oppose the recent move of a bus stop from in front of the ballet school at 3515 Wisconsin Avenue to directly in front of the Crestview condominium at 3601 Wisconsin. We are strongly requesting that both notices of intent, NOI 23-188-TDD and NOI 23189-TOA are reversed. Please return the bus stop to its original configuration in front of the ballet school and return the 5 RPP parking spaces that were in front of the Crestview. The new bus stop prevents the ability of emergency vehicles, delivery trucks, ride-sharing services, and others from being able to safely park in front of the building. We've also pointed out that the bus stop does not have the adequate clearance required in front of the bus stop of 30 to 50 feet per a WMATA study that was done in 2009 with very specific guidelines. There also has not been any site-specific analysis that has been provided to us to support the bus stop move. We have emailed, we've placed calls, we've done everything within the process, hoping that someone would listen to us. We have not even received a response to date. So I hope that, again, this is one of the easier things that you will deal with today, and I hope that you will take the time to do so. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Joseph. I think we'll have someone follow up with you, and
Allison, could you
might be a DC issue.
Spring, could you help here too, please?
Just connect.
Thank you so much.
I
and
love
we'll
this.
figure out if it's us, DDOT, collaborate one way or the other.
Yeah,
Thank you very much. I really appreciate it. And happy holidays to everyone.
Thank you.
Next, Mr. Orleans, Bill Orleans.
Good morning. It's been about a year since I learned that the public could participate in person in these meetings again. And it's been about that long that I've been requesting of a variety of people, including the board of directors and the general manager himself, for an opportunity to get 5 minutes of his time to explain why I think I and any other interested member of the public should once again have the opportunity to attend and observe the most important committee, I will continue to say this, the most important committee that meets at WMATA, and that's the Jurisdiction Coordinating Committee. He's heard my request several times, as have the board, as have some of the government relations folks. It's been about a year. I don't know precisely the amount of time, but it's been about a year. Somebody ought to answer me whether he's going to give me 5 minutes or not at some point. I've been saying for several years, since it was first proposed that the FBI should be relocated to Greenbelt Station, that I enjoy the opportunity to tell the FBI where to go. Sometimes that's not appreciated or fully misunderstood as I want it to be. But in any event, I don't think it should come to Greenbelt. It's been proposed most recently that there will still be 14 developable acres for mixed use in addition to the FBI campus. I don't see where those 14 acres are going to be. It would be very oddly mixed. The uses would be very oddly shaped if that were to be the case. But frankly, that's not my point about the FBI or Greenbelt. We don't have regional cooperation, despite several of you sitting on several regional boards, this one being among them. We have regional competition, not cooperation. The whole angst about whether the FBI should go to Maryland or Virginia is an example. Last night and this morning, I'm finding out that monumental, greedy sports and entertainment venue has signed an agreement, non-binding, who knows, signed an agreement to move to Virginia, to Alexandria, Virginia. Whatever that would do to disrupt Metro's transit plans or not, it's an example of regional competition that is misplaced. The FBI belongs in the District of Columbia. The Capitals and the Wizards belong in the District of Columbia, and we ill-serve our region when those of us who are interested in economic development more so than good regional stabilized population and economic conditions are trying to grab something from one another. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Bill. Our last speaker, Ms. Denise Rush. Denise.
Morning, please.
Good afternoon. I'm Denise Rush, Vice Chair of the Accessibility Advisory Committee and Vice Chair of Metro Access. Today I'm speaking for the public. Everyone who has to move around needs public transportation. And today we heard really bad news, but it is a need. What the public does not understand, how can you get up $5 or $6 million easily for bouncing a ball around? You're going to move, you won't be able to have people come to see them bounce the ball around if we don't have WMATA moving where it needs to move. Where are your priorities? I'm not understanding how you can get 6 million or whatever the owner of the teams wants, and he wants cash, but you can't get up money to make sure that they get to the game. A lot of people are not going to be able to get to the game. And Metro Access is a paratransit system. It's going to take a double hit. If you say 20% increase, that doubles for Metro Access. If you say 50% increase, it doubles for paratransit. Where are the priorities? What are you thinking? These arenas, these malls, everything. Metro WMATA gets people to them. They need to have a set aside funding to make sure that you can get buses, you can do track work, you can do whatever you need. Please, can the officials get their heads on right? Thank you. Have a nice Thanksgiving. I'm sorry, Christmas. Have a Merry Christmas. Happy Kwanzaa. And I'm not going to cry in front of you. Thank you.
Well, happy holidays, Denise. Okay. Okay, that was, thank you everyone for your comments. Now we'll hear from the Accessibility Advisory Committee Chair. Patrick, are you here? Yeah, Patrick Sheehan.
Well, I'm hoping the mic doesn't shut off on me this time, as it did a couple of months ago. Like Denise said, we did hear a troubling report today with respect to the rock bottom budget. And we want to make sure that the AAC will step up and do what it can to help alleviate services that can be cut for people with disabilities, and that's our charge. I want to start out by saying, I wish everyone on the board happy holidays. The work that I see that's being done at WMATA, the amount of work that went into that report with the estimates of impacts on rail stations, commuters, bus, and the questions that were asked by this board gives me confidence that we are going to be able to find a solution going forward. You have the commitment from myself and members of the AAC to work alongside you to make sure that we can not accept what we have here within this budget going forward. I was reading the other day that said the only easy day was yesterday, and that's what I see going forward from here. We're going to have to do an awful lot of work. I understand Ms. Valerie Santos is new from District of Columbia. I'd like to be able to offer her to come to our AAC meeting in January or February and do a meet and greet, and also other members of the board would be welcome. We're very interested in being able to talk to you, and members of the AAC would like to know what we can expect, new information, ask questions directly to board members. And since we meet virtually, would be fairly easy to do. Also wanted to indicate Mr. Blake, Christian Blake, will be talking to us on Monday with respect to the impact that some of these budget cuts would have on the Metro Access system. As Denise so articulately said, we would take sort of a triple hit, really, if we reduce the size of the area back to the ADA standard area, then take a second hit with respect to the bus and rail systems being cut. And thirdly, on the fact that the fares may go up and we may lose our $4 cap that we have right now. We want to try to maintain services for people with disabilities as best we can, particularly in the area of Metro Access. Those individuals have no other way to get their medical appointments, dialysis, and those areas. So you have people that are transit dependent, and then you have those that are extremely vulnerable and can't articulate perhaps some of their needs, but will be the hardest hit. So our job at the AAC will be to work to try to mitigate those cuts. I think on the positive side, as I've said, this board is very smart, it's very dedicated, and you do your homework. That's obvious. Staff at WMATA is very much the same. I'm very pleased with the fact that we have Office of ADAP programs transitioned under Maggie Butler. We're looking forward to her leadership in the area of accessibility. You have very dedicated staff within WMATA here who do a very good job, and those folks are some of the best. You also have Mr. Christian Blake, who's done a magnificent job in the area of Metro Access. A big thanks to him for his leadership over the last 10 years with the AAC. He's brought us to where we are, and we are ready to stand beside you and work with you to ensure that you will get the best product and best recommendations from our group going forward. So any members of the board who would like to come to our meetings, certainly we can work through ADA staff, Anu Sharma, and make that happen. We just need more direction from you as to what kind of information we can provide so that we can work together to try to mitigate this budget that we just heard with respect to 2025. Are there any questions for me?
Any questions or comments from Mr. Sheehan? No, not today, Patrick.
Not today. Good.
All right.
Plenty of work. I'm sure there'll be questions on both sides. Thank you very much. Have a happy holiday. We'll get busy in 2025. Thanks.
You too, Patrick. Okay, next I'll call on Mr. Leibowitz for the RAC report. Good afternoon, Michael.
Good afternoon. So I joined the RAC some time ago out of a kind of a sense of frustration with the system. It was for a while there, weren't sure if I was going to get to work on time, whether I was going to get home in time to get my kid from daycare before they start charging like $5 a minute. I know I wore sneakers while I rode the train because you never know when the train was going to break down and have to walk. And I paid attention. I wasn't the only one. But then something pretty remarkable happens over the last year and a half. the system is really markedly and really improved. And that's my observation is from our rider outreach through the RAC. People are telling us that things, obviously there's some, there's always some things like buses or big ones, some things on the trains, but big picture wide, the riders are telling the RAC that things are overall so much more improved. It's night and day from how it was in my old sneaker days. And that's a testament to the general manager and his staff, the union employees, and to this board. And riders recognize that, and the RAC certainly recognizes that. So reason why I'm telling you all that is because riders are also telling us, and I can tell you personally, that we don't want to go back to how it was a couple of years ago, having to wear the sneakers, not knowing if we get to work on time. I can't tell you how many people, just like your reaction about the daycare thing, because that is something that every little thing when service goes down or there's service cuts or there's inconsistencies or you don't know what's going on with it, and you have to fund certain things, take away from capital improvements, things like that, those all go into the calculus that riders have to make when planning out their day, because Metro really is a lifeline for people of all stripes throughout the transit zone. And I think some riders also have indicated to the RAC, through our outreach, that they're kind of a little bit of the head in the sand mentality. And I certainly understand why, because the proposed cuts that are now public, those are so horrible that they can't possibly ever come to fruition. That's kind of the rider mentality, because it will cause riders to abandon the system in droves. And there's no question about that. You all recognize that. Certainly thank the board or the staff, general manager, for the work you put in to put together. We understand that, but the results of that are just horrendous for riders from a personal standpoint. So we touched on this a little bit last board meeting. We talked about RAC activities. So in the December RAC meeting a few weeks ago, the RAC approved kind of our phased approach to outreach, because what we are going to do is the RAC is going to educate the public and our regional, state, local leaders about the human element, about the rider perspective of these proposed cuts, what it means to riders if our leaders don't come through with appropriate funding. And so we're going to, and here's who's going to hear this. Before what the RAC agreed on is before January 10th, when the Virginia and Maryland General Assemblies meet, the RAC is going to send some outreach to the Virginia legislators, Maryland legislators, Governor Youngkin, Governor Moore, supervisors from the counties. We're going to send it to for Mayor Bowser, Council, Secretary Buttigieg, and our congressional delegations. And we're going to send that out. We are going to specifically tell them what these service cuts mean to the riders. And that's going to be our lane. It's going to be the rider perspective and what this means, how much of a lifeline Metro is to the riders. And second phase of our approach is we're going to work with other organizations. I have several calls scheduled. We're already working and speaking with a few organizations. The RAC already has a great relationship with the AAC, but we're going to move beyond that paradigm. And we are, the goal is to work with other organizations that are transit focused. Maybe it's nonprofit sector, business, things like that. And the RAC is going to try to take the lead in unifying that voice so that we can create a unified voice to speak out on what these service cuts mean and what the system needs, with the RAC's focus being on riders and, again, the lifeline for that. On that fine note, I also want to wish all of you a happy holiday season and thank you for everything that you're doing. Subject to any questions from the board.
Any questions from Michael? Comments? Okay, thank you. Happy holidays, Michael. Okay, that concludes our advisory reports. Now we'll move on to the chair's report. Speaking of advisory bodies, I'd like to highlight another group that works very closely with Metro staff. and that's the Youth Advisory Council. The YAC, terrible acronym. This program promotes college readiness, influential leaders, and global citizens. While this group is not an advisory body of the board, we do have a board liaison, alternate director April Ray, who engages with youth and is creating a vital bridge between the Youth Advisory Council and the board. She has attended several Youth Advisory Council meetings and would like to report out on their activities. I'll note for the record that alternate director Ray is not a participating board member in this meeting. Her only role is to report on the advisory group's activities. Unfortunately, April cannot be with us today in person, so she submitted a video report. John.
Greetings, everyone. My name is April Rye, and it's my privilege to give a brief update on the important work of the MTPD Youth Advisory Council and what a wonderful experience that I've had in attending several council meetings this year. The mission of the Youth Advisory Council includes educating and growing youth and providing a safe space for students to speak their piece. The Youth Advisory Council is facilitated by MTPD, the Community Services Bureau, and is a flagship educational opportunity that provides a safe space for local high school students to learn valuable life skills while promoting positive interactions with law enforcement. Some of the topics that are included in the meetings is personal finance and budget, discussions about compassionate law enforcement, career opportunities and pathways, and input on Metro initiatives like budget, fare evasion, and Better Bus. The youth receive earned service participation hours that are actually required by schools. They receive a letter of recommendation upon their completion from the Youth Services Division, and they enjoy a free meal during the evening program. They also have the opportunity to share their views on local issues that make a real difference in our community. This year, MTPD has seen a 400% increase in participation as compared to last year, no doubt due to the dedicated outreach efforts at targeted high schools from the Youth Service Division officers and civilians. The demographics of the youth that attend include 90% African American, 5% Hispanic or Latino, and 5% other or white. Their ages range from 14 to 18, and they are in grades 9 through 12 represented. This meeting is attended by Metro board members and staff sometimes, and the program is highly impactful and a wonderful example of intentionally engaging the community. I want to take a moment to recognize Sadia Staten, Program Manager of Metro Transit Police Department, Aaron Kors, Community Engagement and Outreach Officer, Shonda Lewis, Director of Engagement and Continuous Improvement with the Community Services Bureau, and the officers in our Community Services Bureau and Youth Services Division. These are dedicated, amazing WMATA employees that showcase their commitment to community every single month. They are so engaging, so encouraging, and supportive of all the youth that are in attendance. So I think these are those ones who should be applauded for their work. Thank you so much for your attention, and I look forward to keeping the board apprised of this program and its successes and impact on the communities that WMATA serves. Thank you.
That's great. I wish April were here in person. We could say thank you to her. And for those of you who don't know, April is a real leader in many areas of the larger transit community world nationally, really. And it's really great that she's engaging with this group. She's like the perfect person to do that. So, all right, next, I'd like to officially and publicly welcome DC Principal Director, Valerie Santos. Valerie is a senior urban specialist at the World Bank Group. She works with national and local governments around the globe on urban economic development strategies, financing local infrastructure, regeneration of city centers and waterfronts, metropolitan management, and housing, and has advised on urban projects in Brazil, Colombia, Georgia, Guatemala, Jamaica, Peru, Panama, the Philippines, and South America. South Africa. Azerbaijan. Before joining the World Bank Group, she served as a deputy mayor for planning and economic development in Washington, D.C. During her tenure, the city invested in transforming hundreds of acres of unutilized land into parks and mixed use and commercial developments, implemented ambitious neighborhood revitalization initiatives in underserved communities, and Valerie was responsible for a portfolio of projects valued at more than $13 billion. Valerie holds a master's degree in business administration and public policy from Harvard University and a bachelor's degree from Santa Clara University. Now I'll ask Valerie to please join me in the front so we can make this official.
Plug into those commercials.
So please raise your right hand. I, please state your name,
I, Valerie Joy Santos,
do hereby solemnly swear that I will support and defend the Constitution of the United States
do solemnly swear that I will support and defend the Constitution of the United States
and the Charter and laws of the District of Columbia,
and the Charter and laws of the District of Columbia,
from which I was appointed as a principal director of the board
from which I was appointed as a principal director of the board
of the Washington Metropolitan Area Transit Authority,
of the Washington Metropolitan Area Transit Authority,
and will faithfully discharge the duties of the office upon which I am about to enter.
and will faithfully discharge the duties of the office upon which I am to enter.
I acknowledge that I understand and agree to be bound by
I acknowledge that I understand and agree to be bound by
the fiduciary duties stated in the Code of Ethics for members of the WMATA Board of Directors.
the fiduciary duties stated in the Code of Ethics for members of the WMATA Board of Directors.
Thank you, Valerie, and congratulations.
Thank
We
you.
look forward to your participation.
Thank you. As I've shared with my fellow board members and the staff that I've had an opportunity to meet, I am delighted to be stepping back into public service directly, even though my day job involves working on cities and transit and sustainability issues. So this is a very momentous time to be joining the board, a difficult time, honestly. Difficult for the entity, I mean. And I hope that my perspective and my background will be able to contribute to the already phenomenal level of the depth and breadth of expertise of the board. So thank you.
And I'd also like to take this opportunity to thank alternate director Springworth for stepping in when she did. And in Spring, you were always so very thoughtful and really came in at a really difficult time, a lot of things happening, and really just appreciated your level head and your thoughtfulness on all those topics. So thank you. And you're not going away, so you're staying. Next, we will need to fill the DC vacancy on the Finance and Capital Committee. I move to appoint DC Principal Valerie Santos to the Finance and Capital Committee. Is there a second?
Second.
Let's see, Dr. Lowe or Mr. Letourneau? Yes, of course, Dr. Lowe.
Second vice chair. It's got the second right in the title.
All right. Any discussion? All right. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? The ayes have it. Thank you. Now we'll move on to the RAC appointments. As the RAC appointing body, the board is required to approve appointments to the RAC. I would like to move the following appointments. Solomon Chen as member from the Commonwealth of Virginia with a term to expire December 2025. Brandon Wu as a member of the District of Columbia for a term that will expire in December 2025. And Leonard Edwards as an at-large member with a term to expire in December 2025. And the following appointments: Cole Stout is a member of the District of Columbia with the term to expire December 25, and Dina Passman as an at-large member with a term to expire in December 2025. Can I have a motion?
So moved.
Motion by Dr. Lowe. Is there a second? Seconded by Mr. Letourneau. Any discussion? All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? The ayes have it. I would like to welcome the new members to the RAC, as well as to thank the 3 members whose terms are ending, Emma Warsman, Lovell Walls, and Jose Delased, for their service. Finally, I'd like to wish everyone a wonderful and safe holiday season. We'll be back for committee meetings in the new year on January 11th. This concludes my report. Now I'll turn the floor over to the General Manager for his report, Mr. Clark.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Been a long meeting, so mine won't take a long time here, but we're wrapping up the calendar year, and it's a year of usual celebration and joyousness and reflection and thankfulness. And so I just have a few slides here that I just want to really acknowledge all the people, kind of quite frankly, that I'm thankful for as being the general manager and having the opportunity to work with this great organization. So I think without a doubt, we're thankful for our customers. Put up with a long, hard process during COVID and stuck with us, and now are returning in great numbers. And I really appreciate their honesty, their urgency, their pushing us, and coming back to the system. So 32% increase on bus and rail ridership year over year. That breaks down to about 43% increase on rail and 23% increase on bus, of which we're carrying more people now than pre-pandemic on bus overall. We have the highest customer rail satisfaction score in the history of the organization. Just really want to thank them for using us every day, relying on us, and pushing us to be better for them. We're also customers are riders, so it all matters. And then also for our visitors, our stakeholders, all those major events that we get people around to. Cherry Blossom Festival this year was absolutely, it was packed. Largest, I think, if I recall, Sunday Cherry Blossom Day we had in almost a decade. July 4th was one of the highest we've had in a long time. First Amendment rallies were gigantic, obviously, this year. Sporting events and concerts were helping drive the recovery of the regional economy. And obviously, we opened Dulles, and the Thanksgiving period travel was some of the highest we've seen in almost 7-8 years, depending on how you cut the data around national, and of course Dulles is growing. So just really want to thank our customers for using us and pushing us to be better, and we look forward to a good year ahead, at least through July 1st, and with a lot of support onward from there as well. Next up, I want to really recognize, thankful for all of our partners in the region and this board. It goes without saying, I think, that we forget that the FY24 budget process wasn't, it took a lot of effort by a lot of people to make that happen. And it took a lot of hard decision making and collaboration. And so I mentioned before, whether it's COG and all the work they're doing to help us work through our challenges, all of our CAOs, our county administrative officers and their staff, the JCC and others. A lot of people put a lot of time into this organization. Their business community, nonprofit, advocacy groups, lots of people are working to make a better metro and pushing us to be that. And I want to thank them. I want to thank our local law enforcement agencies. Especially, I'll give a lot of recognition to Mayor Bowser stepping up with MPD. When we needed security assistance the most, she was there on a phone call with me literally that day. And a lot of other regional partners have stepped up, and that's why crime is going down 9 straight months. And I just really appreciate how much our law enforcement community, really public safety community support us. Fire, EMS, police, we're part of that whole network. 3 new buildings, both this headquarters and our new building in Virginia and Maryland. Our local jurisdictions helped with those, whether it's zoning and permitting and working through things. And now they're anchors to really build better neighborhoods around those buildings. We now do Narcan all throughout the system on our police, and that was donated free in the training. That was an incredible partnership. Fairfax and our federal government partner on Cinderbag Garage, the largest electric bus award in the United States this year at $104 million, incredible partnership. Potomac Yard Station opening with our friends in Alexandria and in Virginia, 30 some years in the making. And on the DC side, Kids Ride Free, incredible collaboration. I think we learned a lot from the previous year, and this year I think has gone really well. We're getting, we are the city school bus system in a lot of ways, whether it's bus and rail, and it's going really well. And we're really collaborating with our schools at a much higher level. Clear lanes and clear lanes. I see Alderman Board Member Worth back there. Her and other people, including our team, have worked so hard to get clear lanes going, and it really matters. The bus matters, and we need to show respect for the bus. Therefore, we're showing respect for the bus customers. 24-hour bus launches in DC in a couple days. That is a big deal. You'll do none of that. That's a big deal. And then our Metro Lift, and I thank the board for recognizing all the staff work with over 6,000 people already signed up. And we're working with all these nonprofits and other jurisdictions to make it so the people that really need assistance the most can have that leg up. And then, I never want to skip a moment and just, I know I say this to you a little bit, and go back one sec, is the board. This is a great board. I've had the privilege of working for multiple boards. I've been on boards. I really appreciate what you do every day. This is a challenging organization to be part of. There's a lot of people, whether it's on Twitter or somewhere else, that thinks they can do your role perfect every day. But you come in and you commit a lot of time. I appreciate your support and guidance to the whole staff and recognized staff, and to me personally, your support. And there's just a few photos of what we've accomplished as a group this year. And I also didn't want to miss the WMSC. In the top left corner too, that's a picture of the WMSC board touring our new control center with us, and all of their help and collaboration this year, making Metro a safer organization as well. So just really thankful for our board and partners. And then last but not least, just take a second here to be thankful for our staff and contractors, and just an incredible group of people that are working really, really hard, 24/7, 365. There hasn't been one thing I've asked this team to work hard on in 15 months that they haven't said yes, and their passion and commitment to this organization and this region blows me away. I've been around transit my entire career. This is the best team in transit in the United States. They're giving it everything they got every day. We're hiring great people. We're retaining great people. We're getting projects done. We're out there. Our surveys show internal pride has increased, and I think that shows a lot why the outcome of what we're getting done matters a lot. And I thank you all for participating in so many events we do, whether it's graduation ceremonies, promotional ceremonies, coming out at night at town halls, being out in the field. They love seeing board members out there as well. So staff and contractor team, thanks for everything you do. Hopefully you have a very peaceful, joyous, calm, and quiet holiday season, and I really appreciate you, and we'll be back at it in January for another great year. Thanks. That's my report, Mr. Chair.
Question? Well, I'd like to say on behalf of the board, I think, Randy, we can also say a big thank you to you and your team over this last 15 months, or 16 months now, I guess, that you've been there, however long.
Yeah.
It seems like years, right? Yeah. But no, it's really been transformative, and the staff has really come together and done a great job. So thank you. Appreciate that. All right.
Hey, Mr. Chairman,
of course.
We're missing silver on the.
Oh, yeah.
Just saying.
Ooh, apologies.
Well, you got to check ridership at 10 State before we can put that on there.
Staff, GM problem there.
Is that one of your thresholds, Tracy? What do you make the trip?
Can we move the slide? There we go. Thank you.
All right. Next, we have one item referred to the board from this morning's executive committee meeting. The 2023 Title VI Plan Update. Staff sought the committee's approval of the 2023 Title VI Plan Update. The 2023 Title VI Plan updates several program elements, including demographics of the transit zone and customers, language assistance plan, the public participation plan, the monitoring of service standards, the Title VI complaints received and investigated, and revises service and fare equity analysis. I'd like to move approval. Can I get a second?
Second.
Seconded by Dr. Lowe. Any discussion or comments? Hearing none. All in favor? Any opposed? The item is approved. Report by the Finance Committee. And now I'll turn the floor over to Mr. Letourneau for a report from the Finance and Capital Committee.
Okay, we have one item referred to the board from the morning's Finance Capital Committee, which is acceptance of DC public hearing staff reports and amendments to the Mass Transit Plan for proposed changes to Deanwood and Congress Heights to amend the Mass Transit Plan to reflect Deanwood removal of 160 space park and ride lot and Congress Heights relocation of the bus loop and kiss and ride facilities, reduction in kiss and ride capacity from 54 to 8. Mr. Chairman, I move approval.
Thank you, Mr. Letourneau. There is a motion on the floor. Can I get it?
Second.
Seconded by Dr. Lowe. All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The item is approved. We have one item on the consent calendar, the board's consent agenda this morning. I'd like to move approval of the following item: the Title VI analysis, senior smart trip card fee elimination, approval of the Title VI analysis that finds that there is no disparate impact on minority riders and no disproportional burden on low-income riders regarding eliminating the $2 fee to purchase a senior Smart Trip card and eliminating the fee for senior Smart Trip cards for qualified individuals effective January 14th, 2024. I'd like to move approval. Can I get a second?
Second.
Seconded by Ms. Martin. Any comments or questions? All right. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? That item is approved. Yes, of course.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I just wanted to take a moment and recognize Board Member Drummer on that specific piece. Time has gone by so fast that we forget that this was about 7 months ago that Board Member Drummer actually asked staff to move this forward and then for us to do the Title VI analysis, to which then we could come back and do that. So I didn't want that part to go back, and thank you, Board Member Drummer, for pushing that along.
Thank you. Next, we'll go to reports by the jurisdictions and VTC.
I do want to say that MVTC, I believe yesterday or the day before, released its recommendations and analysis of Metro's kind of budget situation and look forward on how we may begin to solve it. So I'm happy to share with the rest of the board and appreciate all the hard work that went into that. There was a lot of input from a lot of the jurisdictions in the region, elected officials, and then a lot of staff work. So.
WSTC, Mr. McAndrew. No report. District of Columbia, Dr. Lowe.
Yeah, a couple things. First, I just want to share that just based on the conversations that I'm having in the Wilson building, but also based on, public comments made yesterday by leadership from our council in DC, I am confident that the district's share of WMATA's costs is going to be covered in FY25. I think that there's a lot of details to be worked out within that, but I am confident based on the conversations that I've had that the commitment is there. And so there's a lot of work to be done, but I am not worried that the district is not going to come through. We are going to figure this out. That said, I also want to remind everyone that the 19th annual Downtown Holiday Market is back. November 17th through December 23rd from noon to 8 p.m. every day. Go to downtown Washington, D.C. at 8th and F Street. This is right in front of the National Portrait Gallery in order to get all kinds of one-of-a-kind items that you cannot find anywhere else for all of your holiday gift needs, including one-of-a-kind items from WMATA's own pop-up store.
Is there anything left? I'm hearing the inventories are very low. Oh, okay, umbrellas. Perfect. And I hear you can...
We're closing the deficit for the day.
Okay.
Yeah, gonna get this 750 million one towel at a time.
All right, federal government, Ms. Klein. Ms. Martin Proctor. Okay, no report. With no further business to come before the board, we will stand adjourned. We'll move now to executive session. In accordance with the bylaws, I, Paul Smedberg, request that the Board of Directors convene an executive session to discuss the following matters pursuant to Article 2, Paragraph 9, subsections A, budgetary matters that may affect legal positions, WMATA contracts, or sensitive relationships with local jurisdictions and/or the federal government, B, litigation, investigations, or other legal matters requiring the provision of legal advice or consultation with counsel and staff members. C, personnel or labor issues, including discussions of labor contracts and labor negotiations, consideration or interviews of candidates for employment, and the assignment, appointment, promotion, performance, demotion, or resignation of individuals. And F, safety and security matters where premature release would compromise public safety. Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Dr. Lowe. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? The ayes have it. Thank you all very much.